Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Accidentally Discovered SeriIida? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Ever since Tenya could remember, he wanted to be a hero. Heroes had always been a part of his life, but that didn't tell the whole story. Heroes were integrated into society, directly woven into its fibers. You couldn't even walk down the street without seeing a hero walking by, on patrol, or hearing people gossip about the latest drama in the world of pro-heroes. He had grown up with heroes surrounding him, whether it be his brother walking him to school on his days off, or Auntie Namuri babysitting him when he was a toddler. She was not a good babysitter and she was to blame for his unfortunate first word, or at some fancy charity event where everyone smelled vaguely of champagne. Heroes had always been a huge part of his life. Sometimes it was a little strange, seeing heroes outside of the prying eyes of the media, relaxed and outside of their costumes, but he got used to it. Because of his upbringing and his family's place in hero society, everyone really expected him to become a hero. Everyone expected him to carry on the family legacy, to carry on the Ingenium title. And Tenya had no problem living up to those expectations. All he ever wanted to do was make his family proud, especially Tensei. His brother was his world, his purpose, his motivation, everything. Tensei was strong, caring, dedicated, and everything else a hero should be. In just about every one of his happy memories, Tensei was there. Hide and seek, beach visits when he was little, blowing out candles on a birthday cake with brilliant blue frosting, visiting their grandparents on weekends. But there were bad memories too. Of course there were. But Tensei was there in a lot of those too. A beacon in the darkness. Tensei was always there when he fell down. When thunderstorms and nightmares woke Tenya up in the night, his brother would always be there. Tenya remembered one of his worst memories strikingly. Well, to say it was one of his worst memories made it sound horrible. It was horrible, yes, but in a good way, if that made sense. He was 3 years old when it happened, but he remembered it like it was yesterday. It was late at night on a Tuesday and Tenya had been sleeping like a baby. Even though he and his mother hadn't done much that day, he just felt tired. He had taken 4 naps throughout the day, despite his mother's protests that he wouldn't be tired when bedtime came. But he was tired when bedtime came. Extremely tired. He remembered Tensei picking him up and bidding their parents farewell as they went off to some fancy charity event held by some higher-ups in the city. Tensei had climbed the stairs carefully and ran his fingers through Tenya's hair as he opened the door to his younger brother's room and walked over to the bed. Then Tensei had laid him down and tucked him in, pressing a kiss to his forehead before flicking off the lights and closing the door gingerly. Tenya had been dreaming peacefully of flying around the city as a bird, when he was woken abruptly by a sharp pain jutting through his legs. His calves felt like they were being stripped off of his bones, and Tenya's only coherent thought was to scream with all the air in his lungs and to hope that someone would come save him. But soon he ran out of air to scream out and no one was there. He needed to breathe but he couldn't. The only thing he needed was the pain to go away. Tensei had burst through the door and rushed to his brother's side, thoughts no doubt running a mile a minute. He took in the scene, Tenya, tears rolling down his face as he gasped for air, kicking his legs weakly. A look of understanding passed over Tensei's face as he scooped his brother up and rushed back down the stairs, sitting down on the couch. He rocked his brother slowly and rubbed his back comfortingly as Tenya sobbed into his shoulder. Hours passed and Tenya's breathing slowed and his posture slumped. He was asleep. Tensei stood up and massaged his brother's legs carefully, making sure to steer clear of the mufflers that were now poking out of his calves. The elder Ida climbed the stairs and turned to his room. Tenya would sleep in his bed tonight just in case. The next morning, Tenya woke up to his brother shaking his shoulder with one hand, balancing 2 trays of food on his other arm. He blinked a few times as Tensei climbed onto the bed and passed his younger brother a tray, which had a tall glass of orange juice and an omelet on it. Ever since that day, eggs had been one of his favorite breakfast foods. Growing his engines had been a motivator. A painful motivator, yes, but a motivator nonetheless. He would be a hero for his family, and now that he had manifested his quirk, his dream was closer to being reality. That's all that mattered. He needed to make them proud. So he worked. Ida studied late into the night and trained so hard that he swore his legs were going to fall off. It hurt, but that meant it was working. He was getting stronger. All he could hope for was that one day he would be strong enough to make everyone proud. Ida didn't have very many friends growing up, though that was partially his own fault. But that was fine. It was good to have social connections, yes, but he never was good with people. No one liked him for him, anyway. Ever since he was little, people knew who he was. His classmates included. Some of them would avoid him, others would try and get on his good side because of his family, though most were just content sitting off to the side and watching him. There were some kids who approached him with good intentions, but they always ended up leaving in the end, giving up halfway through making a friendship. Besides, Ida was always more comfortable alone anyway. The only person he could be with for hours on end without feeling like he had just ran 10 miles, sans quirk, was Tensei. Everyone else was just so tiring. He had to keep up appearances. He was of the Ida family and he couldn't let them down. So he was serious, made hand motions that most people thought were weird when he talked. He had Auntie Namuri to thank for that bad habit, and was a stickler for the rules. Unfortunately, this sentiment wasn't shared by all of his classmates. So when Ida would scold them for running in the halls or making fun of another student, they noticed him. And they didn't like what they saw. So instead of making fun of the sweet boy who just so happened to cry more than usual, they made fun of him. His glasses, his engines, his eyebrows, the way he spoke, how he moved his hands, his grades, anything about him. At first Ida was just confused. Why were they talking about him like that? Why would they snicker when he entered the room? But slowly he started to understand. He understood that children were cruel. Just like they had made fun of Fumetsu for crying too much, they were making fun of how he talked. It didn't go much farther than teasing for the most part, but there were moments when no one else was around and the kids thought they could get away with roughing him up a little. When the leader of the group had thrown the first punch, Ida didn't know what to do. He had taken several different martial arts and knew how to redirect a hit, but he never thought he would have to actually use his knowledge, at school no less. Well, that wasn't true. He expected to use it when he got into UA one day, in hero training. But that was years in the future. So he swerved to the side and did what he did best. He ran. He ran all the way home, which was a ridiculously long way to go, but it felt good. Feeling the wind in his hair, the steady thumping of his feet on the pavement as he weaved between passers-by. It was amazing. From that day on, Ida kept his head held high. He wasn't going to lay down like a wounded puppy just because one person didn't like him. Heroes fought for justice and some people didn't like that. Villains didn't like it. Some civilians didn't like heroes. Heroes never stopped because people didn't like them. They kept going because people believed in them. Tensei believed in him, and that's all that mattered. He was on a timer. There was a year until the UA. His grades were amazing, but they weren't good enough. So he worked harder. He was fast, but he wasn't fast enough. So we worked harder. The next thing he knew, the timer went off. It was time for the entrance exam. As Ida climbed the stairs, he set his face determinedly. He had refused his family's offer to give him a recommendation. He wanted to get into UA on his own merit, his own skill. He wanted to prove to them that he could be a hero. He wanted to prove that to himself too. The written exam had been fairly easy. He had been prepared for such a test. But the real challenge lay in the practical. No one knew what UA would put their examinees through, given the crazed stunts they'd pulled in the past. But there was no point in worrying. Everything should be explained before the actual exam. So he walked through the halls and followed the signs pointing to the auditorium. It's not like he needed them though. He had memorized the layout of UA years ago. Entering the room, Ida found it already filled with people. No surprise there. Thousands of kids from across the country came to try and get into the illustrious heroing school, with only a select few getting in. Ida marched through the rows, searching for an open seat. How many kids got in every year? He needed a number. A solid number. Numbers didn't make fun of you. Numbers didn't mock you behind your back or laugh at you right in front of your face. He sat down heavily, exhaling sharply and clenching his fists. He hadn't even gotten to the difficult part, the practical, and he was already freaking out. He needed to calm down. He needed to calm down. Clenching his jaw and closing his eyes, Ida drew in a firm breath, then slowly let it out. He repeated this until the auditorium was filled to the brim, no seat left unfilled. Opening his eyes, Ida looked down at the paper every participant had been given. 4 types of robots. For faux villains. There was someone muttering to themselves a few rows down. It was ridiculously distracting. The next thing anyone knew, Present Mike was standing at the front of the room in all his leather-clad glory. Just seeing him calmed Ida's heartbeat a little. He had a lot of good memories with Uncle Hizashi, much more than he had with Auntie Namuri. He remembered years ago, asking the voice hero why he wore elbow pads with his costume. Staying safe was always good, yes, but Uncle Hizashi never seemed the type to voluntarily wear such a thing. And he wasn't. Apparently, Uncle SeriIida was so overprotective and worrisome, even back when they attended UA, that he had dragged Hizashi over to the support corps students and forced them to give him padding whenever he got hurt. That's what Ida assumed had happened, considering that both his brother and Uncle Hizashi had been laughing wildly at the story. Ida snapped back to attention as Uncle Hizashi, wait no, he was at work, as Present Mike began explaining how the practical would go. Each of the robots had different amounts of points assigned to them. There it was again. That relentless muttering. Ida's eyes scanned the rows below him. Where was that mutterer? They were distracting him, and they weren't paying attention to what Present Mike was saying. He stood up and called out the mutterer, who turned out to be a boy with curly green hair and freckles, and asked about the 4th type of robot. Even though Present Mike was all the way down on the stage, Ida swore he saw the ghost of a fond smile when he recognized who was calling him out. It was probably just his imagination though. He sat back down and kept breathing. Then, it was time for the exam. He was in the same testing area as the green-haired boy, who was still muttering to himself. After stopping the boy from distracting another examinee, Ida prepared himself. There was no doubt in Ida's mind that this would be one of the most difficult and physically exhausting things he would ever do. But he was ready for it. The next thing anyone knew, everyone was rushing into the arena, some propelling themselves forward with their quirks, others just running forward. Ida burst to the front of the pack and drew in a deep breath. He could do this. He would do this. For Tensei and his mother, for Uncle Hizashi, Uncle SeriIida, and Auntie Namuri. He would do it for himself too. Tenya sighed loudly and ran his hands through his hair. The entrance exam was absolute hell, to say the least. He'd gotten a decent number of points, sure, but he failed the Ida name. With the 0-pointer, and that girl with the pink cheeks. He ran away, just like everyone else. Everyone except for that green-haired boy, who had broken his arm to save her. Tenya was no hero. Not by a long shot. He didn't step in when it mattered most. What good was defeating villains if you didn't save civilians? He was a fraud, through and through. He couldn't be a hero if he put his own safety before those that couldn't defend themselves. Taking his glasses off, Tenya placed them on the nightstand off to his left before flipping over onto his stomach, smothering his face in a pillow. He was sure there were slivers of metal from the robots embedded into his shins, and he should probably stretch a bit more, but right now the only thing Tenya needed to do right now was sleep. But he couldn't. Not with all these thoughts running rampant in his head. Sighing, Tenya forced his face deeper into the pillow. How could he be a hero if he couldn't save one person that was right in front of him? How could he face Tensei if he didn't get in? How could he face Uncle SeriIida and Uncle Hizashi and Aunt Namuri if he got in, knowing he wasn't a true hero? He didn't know how much time had passed, but after dozens more questions he found himself falling asleep. With every passing day, Ida's posture got tenser and tenser. The waiting for was killing him slowly, poisoning him from the inside out through the countless worries and doubts swirling around in his head. He could barely pay attention in class, and when he tried to, he would mess up just about every problem he attempted to do. So for just about all of his classes, Ida would twirl his pen around in his fingers, keep his eyes trained on the clock, and take slow, calculated breaths until the day was over. When the bell finally rang, Ida made a point to pack up his things slowly. He really wasn't in the mood to be caught in a stream of rowdy teenagers. He left the classroom and started walking down the hallway stiffly. The dull ache in his bones from the entrance exam hadn't gone away just yet, even though it had been a few days. Slowly descending the stairs, Ida pulled out his phone and checked the time. He really wasn't in the mood to walk home, so he needed to catch his train. Walking faster, Ida weaved his way through the remaining students and exited the school gate. He was on a sidewalk, then in the train station, then surrounded by people, then he was in front of his house. Almost robotically, Ida emptied the contents of the mailbox and unlocked the door, taking his shoes off before walking through the house. Thankfully, no one else was home. Ida didn't know if he could handle his mother asking how his day was, especially with her fake smile and hardened tone. Walking into the kitchen, Tenya swiftly grabbed a glass and opened the fridge, expertly pouring himself a glass of orange juice. Glancing down at the mail in his hand, the blue-haired teen absent-mindedly sorted through it, sipping his juice thoughtfully. Bills, letters from relatives, a few magazines, and a letter from Yue. Setting everything else on the counter, Ida stared at the envelope. Ever so slowly, he opened the letter and pulled out a small metal disc. He gingerly placed the disc on the counter. Ida drew in a breath and turned it on. The hologram flickered to life, and Ida was greeted by the familiar face of Midnight. "Tenya, my darling, it's wonderful to see you again." She smiled dazzlingly and tossed her hair over her shoulder. "Well, I haven't actually seen you in a long time, but you know what I'm saying." Winking, Midnight started to walk across the screen slowly, the camera following her. "I have no doubt in my mind that you've been spending the past few days distracted, caught up in your own head, and drowning your sorrows in orange juice." She clicked her tongue. "Moving on, I know you must be bursting with anticipation, but I am a cruel woman, so I will drag this on for as long as I can." Miss Midnight, you still have like 14 more of these to record," someone said from behind the camera, voice shaking slightly. "Oh, what a pity." Midnight frowned. "As you've just heard, due to time constraints, I can't torment you for as long as I wish, so I'll try and keep this brief. Blah blah, heroism, blah blah defending the defenseless, blah blah point values, blah blah. What you really need to know is that you, my favorite nephew, are going to be one of the best heroes this world has ever seen." Turning to face the camera, Midnight moved her arms upward. "Ida Tenya, this is the start of your hero academia." With one last wink, the video finished. Ida drew in a breath and let it out slowly. He got in. Immediately his mind started racing. What would his classmates be like? What would their quirks be? What would their fighting styles be? What would their hobbies be? Would he get along with anyone? He hoped he would find the green-haired boy again. He needed to apologize. Picking up the disc and his glass of orange juice, Ida smiled softly. He was on his way to becoming the hero he always dreamed of. Ever since Hanta could remember, he knew what he wanted to do when he grew up. He wanted to be a hero. No, he didn't just want it, he needed it. At first, adults entertained the idea. It was normal for a little kid to want to be a hero. It was like the best job in a kid's eyes. Heroes were famous. They got to show off their amazing quirks and save people. What wasn't to love? But as kids got older, they learned the truth. Rankings were unfair in just about every sense of the word. If you didn't fit into what the commission classified as a good hero, you would be trapped at the lower rankings for your entire career. Heroes had to have cool, flashy quirks. They had to have a marketable personality and a recognizable appearance. They had to do interviews, had to broadcast their relationships with other pros, had to amp up their personality for the media because if you didn't get media attention you were a nobody. And when you were in the spotlight, you were constantly being compared to those around you. Scrutinized in the public eye. Every single one of your actions and words watched. You had to push your body and your quirk to the absolute limit if you ever wanted a chance to get into a hero school, much less get your license. And once everyone found out about how much work went into being a hero, they lost motivation. Sure, it would be cool to be famous, but you could be famous without working 12-hour shifts. You could show off your quirk without pushing your body to its limits each and every day. You could help people without putting your life on the line every time you went off to work. Hanta knew all of that, but he didn't care. He was going to be a hero, no matter what, even if the odds were against him. And the odds were against him. He knew it from the strained smiles that his parents, friends, and teachers gave him when he told them he wanted to be a hero, from the way their eyes flickered down to his elbows or lingered on his plain face. They didn't think he had what it took. And that made him mad. Really, really mad. Who were these people to tell him no? They weren't heroes. They didn't know what it took. They didn't know how bad he wanted this. How hard he was willing to work. They didn't know how hard he had worked to get this far. They didn't matter. The teachers who kept him after class and tried to change his mind. All the kids who tossed his notebooks and school supplies into the fountain outside of school and put tacks in his shoes or tripped him in the hall. They didn't matter. The only people that mattered were his parents and their never-ending support. His coach who took his goals seriously, pushed him to be the best he could be and then some. His siblings, who had already claimed their places as cello fans numbers 1 through 5. His friends, who dealt with his nervous rambling as the UA entrance exam drew closer and closer. He had worked his whole life for this. Like hell he was going to give it up now just because someone didn't believe in him. Hanta. No response. Hanta ah. A few seconds pass. Still no response. Hey, dude. The girl stepped forward and snapped her fingers in front of his nose, 2 times in quick succession. All the lights on up there? Sero let out a squawk, nearly tripping over his own feet as he stumbled backwards. I'll take that as a no. Sorry, Namiko, he apologized, squeezing his eyes shut and shaking his head. Just got a little distracted. Yeah, I noticed, Namiko said dryly. You're lucky I was the one who found you and not Coach. Yeah, I know. Sero shook his head and cracked his knuckles, trying to pull himself out of his own thoughts. What are you doing over here anyway? Aren't you supposed to be on bars? Yeah, but Coach wanted to work more with Rito on her form, so I got kicked off. Ouch. Ouch indeed. Namiko tossed her water bottle from hand to hand. So now I'm bothering you, but you look bothered without me bothering you, and because I'm a good friend, I'm going to ask you what's wrong. A short pause. So, what's wrong? Sero waved a dismissive hand. Nothing that you should be worrying about. Yeah, well, your worrying is worrying me, so it's a little late for that. Whoops. Yeah, big whoops. Namiko took a swig from her water bottle. Now come on. Spill. No, it's fine. You should go do floor with Sora or something. I should probably go work on Beam. Dude. Quit deflecting. I'm offering my emotional support for free right now and you're just wasting it. Sero let out a sigh and shook his head. It's just entrance exams are getting to me, that's all. Stressin' out and all. Namiko snorted. Well, everyone is. She paused. Oh, but you've got to be like the 0.001%, don't you? Yep. Loser. You are not helping. I'm well aware. Namiko took a long drink of water before continuing. But I'm also aware that you're a badass who's been working for this his whole goddamn life and that you're gonna do an amazing job. Nami. Don't get sentimental with me. Pass. Namiko rolled her eyes and smacked Sero with the butt of her water bottle. That's it. Too many emotions. I'm leaving. Tell Sora I say hi. You know what? I think I won't. Sero stuck out his tongue and sent a half-hearted raspberry at Namiko's retreating form in response. He let out a long breath and shook his head. Namiko was right. It didn't matter that only a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent of the applicants got in, or that he didn't have a fancy quirk, or any stupid excuse like that. He could get in. He was going to get in. Because with a smile on your face, a first aid kit by your side, a little bit of elbow grease, and an insatiable drive that could only be fed by proving all the people who told him no wrong. He was going to do this. No matter what. Entrance exams came soon. Way too soon. One day he was sitting in the back of class, trying not to fall asleep as his homeroom teacher droned on and on about the importance of making a good impression and having good posture and emphasizing how life-alteringly important it was to have brushed your teeth. What did she think they were, 8? And then the next he was getting on a train and heading to UA to take the entrance exam. It was peaceful, relatively speaking. It was a nice spring day, the sun was shining and the birds were singing and all that mushy stuff that he probably would have stopped to appreciate if he wasn't so nervous. But he couldn't appreciate it because he couldn't bring himself to sit still for longer than 30 seconds. Tugging at his shirt, running his hands through his hair, tapping his foot, he just couldn't stop. It was either a little bit of nervous fidgeting or letting out a good long scream, but he would probably get in trouble if he screamed, so he would stick to fidgeting. Way too soon but also somehow too late, Sero finally arrived at his stop and made his way towards UA, experiencing only a slight moment of panic when he realized that he had no idea where to go, before realizing that there was a horde of teenagers walking one way and decided that was his best bet, following them as his adrenaline levels started to lower. Kaichi liked to rattle off facts about everything and anything that there was to talk about, so Sero knew how big the building was. But he didn't know how big the building was. Just the archway leading up to the school had to be at least 20 feet high. He wasn't even going to try and make a guess on how big the school itself was. It made sense though. It was like the place for heroes. Heroes were larger than life. It would make sense for their architecture to reflect that or something. Besides, having such a big fancy building full of heroes had to be pure concentrated villain repellent. The only thing he could think of that had more villain-repelling tendencies was All Might himself. Sero shook his head and rubbed the back of his neck. Turns out looking straight up at something for a long time wasn't good for you, and joined the rest of the applicants in walking towards the entrance of the school. Now was no time to lose his jacks. That was a phrase, right? Or was it dominoes? He couldn't remember, and he didn't want to remember because it wasn't important right now. That brain space needed to be spent holding math formulas and stuff. He was going to do this. He had to. He needed to prove himself, and this was how he was going to do it. The practical horrified him. As he sat there, sandwiched between a girl with vines for hair and a boy made out of rocks, it was a very uncomfortable sandwich that he did not want to be a part of. Trying to slow down his heart rate, more and more people flooded into the auditorium. Were this many people even supposed to be in here? He didn't think so. It could be classified as a fire hazard. Bad Hanta. Do not think about the dubious safety protocols of your hopefully school. Bigger fish to fry. After a few minutes in which he managed to get his heart rate down, thank God Present Mike appeared on stage and started to explain how the exam would work. Different testing zones. For robots, you want as many points as possible and no fighting other examinees unless you want to get disqualified. But then someone stood up, probably asking a question about how the exam was going to run, but Sero wasn't listening. The boy was just so gorgeous. Sero was 60% sure he could hear angels singing. His dark blue hair, glasses, and broad shoulders were making Sero's heart do backflips. The chopping motions he was making drew Onyx eyes to his muscled arms, and the determined look in his eyes left Sero breathless. Just wow. But then the boy bowed and sat down, the spotlight on him disappeared, and Present Mike finished explaining and signed off with an exuberant plus ultra. Sero shook his head roughly. Now was not the time to be ogling hot boys. He needed to concentrate on what was right in front of him, the practical. So as he got changed and tied his hair back, forcing himself to think about why he was doing this. He wasn't here to cater to his pansexual, hormonal self. Now was no place to get distracted and fail. He had already come this far. After the entrance exam, Hanta went home, inhaled dinner, took a shower, fell down onto his bed and slept for 13 hours straight. And DMN did it feel good. The first thing he thought of after waking up other than "what year is it?" and "I need food" was of that blue-haired boy, which was seriously annoying. He'd seen the dude once and he was already in love with him, apparently. Thanks, brain. He hadn't seen the dude after that one time in the auditorium, and Hanta was way too disappointed about it. He was looking for a needle, a very attractive needle in a haystack. One person among thousands. Even someone like Hanta, who was horrible at math, understood that his chances of finding the bespectacled angel minuscule. That didn't stop him from being crazy disappointed. He did drag himself out of bed though, got greeted by Yukari, who was way too lively for this early in the morning even though it was noon. Apparently, Reizo remanded that Hanta tell him about all the quirks he saw. Kaichi just waved and turned back to his book, while Haruka opted to ignore him. For the next few weeks, he was a bundle of nerves. He had never paid less attention in school before. At practice, Namiko dumped a bottle of water on his head. Overall, not a good time. And now he was here, getting scolded by his mother as she rummaged around in the hall closet, searching for the first aid kit. "Did you take an aloe bath the night after the exam?" she demanded as a hand towel fell from one of the higher shelves and landed on her head. "Yes, Mama, I did." She stood up, pulling the towel off of her head and tossing it back into the closet as she walked over to the couch, first aid kit in hand. "Did you keep taking them after that first day?" "No. And that is exactly why your skin is so dry." She shook her head and sank down onto the couch. "I expected something like this from Reizo, but you? I thought you were supposed to be the responsible one." "Sorry, Mama." Konomi sighed. I know UA is going to be a big change, but that doesn't mean that you can be completely reckless. You still have to take care of yourself." She clicked her tongue and grabbed one of Hanta's hands, examining it with concerned eyes, wincing when he saw how truly nasty they were. He looked at his other hand and cringed. She was right. Even when Coach pushed them really hard in training, his hands had grown used to overuse. But apparently not too used to it, because they were totally gross right now. "So, how did the exam go?" "You never got around to telling me," Konomi asked as she rubbed some sort of salve on Hanta's hand and started wrapping it. "It was good. Giant robots aren't my forte, but I think I did a decent job. Written test really SeriIida though." "Well, I'm sure you did fine. You're just saying that because you're my mom. You really think I would do that?" "Yes, absolutely." Konomi chuckled and shook her head as she finished wrapping his hand and started to clean up. A few beats of silence passed before Reizo burst through the door, sweating like a pig. He grunted a greeting as he pulled his shoes off and chucked his bag down the hallway. "It's for you," he said, frisbeeing something into Hanta's lap before retreating into the kitchen. "Honey, I don't want you to eat too much, we still have dinner," Konomi said as she picked up the first aid kit and walked over to the hall closet. Frowning slightly, Hanta picked up the thing and frowned at it slightly, turning it over in his hands. That crest. That was the UA logo." He froze. "Hanta, is it from your sister? She called a few days ago and said she sent us a postcard because she'd be staying in Egypt longer than she thought." Konomi shut the door to the closet and headed back towards the living room. "You're going to need to read it to me, I don't have my glasses on." Taking in a few breaths, Hanta looked over to his mother. It's not from Kirumi." "What? Who's it from then?" "UA." Konomi was at his side in an instant. Open it. But his calloused fingers felt heavy and stiff. Did he want to know what was in the letter? What if he didn't get in? Would UA even send a letter if he didn't get in? Wait, they totally would. "Hanta." Swallowing thickly, Hanta moved his fingers slowly, pinching one corner of the paper and reaching up towards the top of the envelope. Taking in a short breath, he ripped the top of the envelope off and tossed it aside. Alongside the ripped strip of paper, Hanta released the breath and flipped the envelope upside down, dumping its contents into his palm. Both of the Seros looked down at the compact metal disc, confusion on their faces. "Hanta, do you know what that is?" Konomi asked, poking it warily. "Not really," he said, picking up the disc and turning it around in his fingers slowly, inspecting it. He came upon a glowing blue thing that looked like a button, so he pressed it. A minute later, both of the Seros were dead silent as the hologram finished and winked out of existence. Konomi let out a squeal and trapped her son in a bone-crushing hug. "You did it, Hanta. You did it." He pulled away from the hug, a grin splitting its way across his face. "Yeah, I did. I really did it." "Don't sound so surprised," his mother exclaimed before shooting out of her seat. "Oh, we need to celebrate. We need to call Kirumi, and what do you want for dinner?" Hanta smiled wider and looked down at the disc laying in his hand. He was on his way to being a hero. The first day of school started off with lots of little ups and downs for Tenya. He woke up only 15 minutes before his alarm, compared to the usual hour when he was really nervous. Well, that wasn't exactly true. When he was that nervous, he rarely got any sleep at all. So instead of being sleep-deprived, Tenya was jittery. On edge. Whatever you want to call it. He was a little jittery, but that was fine. He was always jittery when it came to new people. And he was jittery when it came to his future as a hero. And he was jittery when he was nervous. Combine the three? Recipe for disaster. Tenya paced around his room, walking to one end, then turning sharply on his heel and walking to the other end. There were still 754 seconds left before he needed to be awake and start his day, technically speaking. And 754 seconds was plenty of time to get most, if not all, of Tenya's worries out of his system, leaving him perfectly ready for the day. Yes, that sounded ideal. In theory it was the perfect plan. In practice though? Not so much. How could he start his day by de-stressing when the sunlight creeping through the gaps in his closed curtains was ridiculously bright as it shined on the floor? His glasses pinching his nose just tight enough that Tenya could already feel a headache coming on. That was no way to start a stress-free day. So Tenya took off his glasses, placing them gingerly on his bedside table as he closed his eyes before resuming his pacing. Both problems solved in one fell swoop. That was good. That was a start. Tenya could feel his heart beating in time with his steps, soft thumps filling the room as he paced back and forth. 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4. Eventually, all of his 700-something seconds were up, and his alarm sounded, snapping him back into reality as he flicked off the alarm and picked his glasses. Tenya headed for the bathroom. Turning on the lights, he walked over to the sink and turned on the faucet, wetting his jittery hands and splashing the cold water on his face. Picking up a nearby hand towel, Tenya wiped the water off his face and stared at himself in the mirror. His eyes were a bit unnerving to most people, and he could see why. They were blue for the most part, but around his pupils the deep cobalt turned into a dark red that spiked out in various places. It wasn't extremely noticeable unless you got really close, and it was a little creepy. Shaking his head, Tenya finished wiping off his face and put his glasses on, opening the cabinet and grabbing his toothbrush. The bespectacled teen stared into his reflection as he brushed his teeth stiffly. Spitting out his toothpaste, Tenya left the bathroom and got dressed, fumbling his tie twice before he finally got it right and exiting his room quietly. The blue-haired boy gingerly walked down the stairs and entered the empty kitchen. The house was usually empty, so Tenya didn't know why he was so disappointed. Tensei was on an early shift, and his parents were probably out at the agency or in a meeting. Sighing slightly, Tenya opened the fridge, pulling out the carton of eggs and a bottle of orange juice. Pouring himself a glass of the juice and taking a long drink, he sighed again, this time much more contentedly. A few minutes later, Tenya settled down at the empty dinner table, chewing his food pensively. That night, when everyone sat down for dinner, his mother would probably scold his father for having paperwork out, even though she was probably going through emails on her phone under the table. Once she had finished replying to said emails, she would put her phone back down into her lap and snag the pen out of her husband's hand, forcing him to stop. At least until she looked away, considering he always had at least 6 pens hidden in his pockets at all times. After she tucked away the pen, Megumi would turn to her sons with a polite smile on her face and ask how their days were. Tensei would probably have some interesting story about villains, or a strange civilian interaction, but he wouldn't say anything, knowing him. He'd just shrug and say nothing interesting happened before turning to his younger brother and asking how his first day of school went. Tenya would clear his throat and concentrate on the wall behind his mother's head and recount the most interesting parts of his day, probably only getting halfway through before Megumi had to confiscate another pen from her husband. Once he was finished, the table would fall into a brief episode of silence before Tensei started talking about anything and everything. Stories they'd heard 1,000 times, strange quotes, vacation ideas, work stories, anything. The only time the room would fall into silence was when he stopped to take a bite of food or a breath. But that would only happen if Tensei was home. If he was out on a shift, then the table would simply sit in silence for the entirety of dinner. Kaku would leave early, saying something about having paperwork to finish. Megumi would be the next to go, getting up to take a phone call that went into long hours of the night. So Tenya would be left alone at the dinner table with a half-eaten plate of food, just like he was now. Suddenly he didn't have much of an appetite. Picking his plate up, he took one last bite of toast and finished off his orange juice. Placing his dishes in the sink, glancing at the clock, Tenya turned off the lights in the kitchen and walked into the foyer, passing old family photos on the way. Picking up his bag and slinging it over his shoulder, Tenya bid farewell to an empty house and started his journey to UA. Taking carefully calculated steps through the hallway, Ida calmed his breathing and rolled his stiff shoulders. He would make today an amazing day, no matter what. It was his first day at UA, for one, and he should be home in time to see Tensei, even if it was for a little bit. Today he would meet his new classmates. He'd meet the people who he would spend the next 3 years with, learning and growing and becoming heroes together. But his classmates might not get along with him, just like all of his classmates past. Ida just had to make a good impression. That was easier said than done, though. All he had to do was think logically. Logic always worked. What would his brother do? Well, Tensei would only need to walk into the room and people would flock to him. Tensei just had that aura about him. He was approachable and Tenya wasn't. So, on second thought, acting like his brother might not be the best idea. Besides, Tensei had always been much better in social situations than he had. Acting like Tensei was a no-go, so what now? Surprisingly, just being himself seemed like the best option for once. He'd be spending the next 3 years with these people assuming no one got expelled, so there really was no point in trying to fake it. Even if he did put up some sort of facade, Present Mike and Midnight would notice and ask him about it. Aizawa would probably notice too, but he would cut out the middleman and go straight to Tensei. That conversation would be an awkward one, and Ida always tried his best to avoid awkward conversations. Besides, being dishonest wasn't a very heroic thing to do. In the end, the pros outweighed the cons. Shaking his head, the bespectacled teen took a right and looked up at the absurdly large door to Class 1A. Opening it and stepping inside, Ida glanced around warily. There were a few people already in the room, and they were talking amongst themselves cheerily like they'd known one another their whole lives. Go and introduce yourself, Ida thought, hands trembling slightly as he wiped his sweaty palms on his breathes. But no one had even turned to look at him yet, everyone being far too engrossed in their conversations, and it would be rude to interrupt them. So Ida rolled his shoulders and walked over to his desk, sitting down and keeping his eyes trained on the door. He still had time before he had to talk to anyone, and he was going to use it. After a few minutes, 3 more people burst through the door, a blonde boy with a lightning bolt-shaped streak in his hair, a girl with pink skin and horns poking out of her curly pink hair, a plain-looking boy with black hair and a crooked smile. They were talking to one another animatedly, the girl bouncing from foot to foot and waving her arms around, smacking one of her companions in the face, the blonde laughing loudly, and the black-haired boy rubbing his nose where the girl had hit him, smiling crookedly. Ida couldn't bring himself to pull his eyes away from that smile. The 3 kept talking as they breezed past the entryway of the room, still talking as they walked through the rows of desks. Ida found himself following the black-haired boy with his eyes. The more he stared, the more he found he liked. His smile was pointed and playful, his teeth distractingly white. What other kinds of smiles did this boy have? What would his smirk look like, or a bashful grin? Ida needed to know. He was tall, standing about a head above his friends, most of his height coming from lanky legs. Exactly how tall was he? Was he taller than Ida? Shorter? Would they be the same height? His hands were big, though unlike Ida's, they had long, nimble fingers that were never in one place for too long. What would it be like to hold his hand? Would it be calloused or smooth? Warm or cold? His onyx eyes were sparkling with mischief as he scanned the room slowly. Ida could get lost in those eyes. The boy was looking at him. Oh no. Instantly, Ida felt heat shoot up into his cheeks as their eyes locked. Oh no. Jerking his head to the right, Ida took off his glasses and started cleaning them, roughly praying that the boy wouldn't stare at him for too long. With how loudly his heart was beating, Ida felt like it was going to explode, even though he knew it wasn't possible. His mind was racing, yet not a single coherent thought could be pulled out of Ida's mind if he tried. It was a very strange feeling. After his blush had died down and his heart rate slowed, Ida pushed his glasses back onto his face and glanced around nervously. The pink-haired girl was doubled over, howling with laughter at something the blonde and said. The black-haired boy was wiping a tear from his eye as he burst out into raucous laughter. It wasn't a pretty laugh by anyone's standards. It didn't sound like tinkling bells, singing angels, or anything like that. It was wheezy and he snorted 4 times throughout it, causing a few people to stare. The best way Ida could describe the sound was a dying moose, or a goose trying to play a trumpet. It was a laugh that Ida wanted to get used to, that he wanted to hear forever. Smiling softly to himself, Ida continued to gaze at the boy, who was still too wrapped up in his conversation to notice, thank goodness. Even though Ida had only known him for a few minutes, the boy had ignited something within his heart. Well, that wasn't exactly true. Ida hadn't properly met him yet, didn't even know his name, but that didn't change anything about setting Ida's heart aflame. The warm, fuzzy feeling in his heart was completely new, very distracting, slightly uncomfortable, but not entirely unwelcome, for some strange reason. Who was this boy and why was he making Ida's heart beat unnaturally and his stomach twist into a pretzel? Well, that was a frivolous question to ask. The blue-haired teen had read enough first-person mystery novels with romance side plots to know the answer. He liked this boy. Liked him. Ida never thought his first crush would be on a boy, much less a boy he hadn't properly met yet. He had always assumed he'd have the picture-perfect family, a wife and kids, but he could imagine becoming pros together, moving into a quaint little apartment, maybe getting a cat or a dog. Wait, what? Get yourself together, Tenya. This was new and exciting and absolutely horrifying. They both were at UA to get an education and become pros, not to find love or anything like that. But that wouldn't stop Ida from dreaming. What was his quirk? What would his sense of humor be like? Would he even like Ida in the first place? At least as a friend, that's all he was asking for. Ida didn't know if his heart could take it if he didn't. Squeezing his eyes shut and drawing in a large breath, Ida shook his head slightly. He opened his eyes and looked around at the room again, a poof of spiky blonde hair and a pair of feet propped up on a desk immediately catching his attention. This would not stand. Or sit. Whatever. Standing up and clearing his throat, Ida briskly walked over to the boy, a stern expression on his face. The next few minutes were a blur, with him yelling at the blonde, the green-haired boy entering the room with the pink-cheeked girl, Ida apologizing extremely loudly, all of this not to mention how Uncle Aizawa, who was his teacher from now on, that totally wasn't terrifying, showed up in his sleeping bag on the floor. It was going to be an experience. Ida didn't know what kind of experience, but he knew it would be one he'd never forget, for good or for bad. Ida had expected Aizawa to pull something, but he didn't expect that he'd do it on the first day, and in such a terrifying way. The person who places last will be expelled. It was very Aizawa-like, considering how many students he had expelled in years past. That didn't make it any less terrifying though, especially when you didn't know Aizawa like Ida did. When their teacher revealed his logical ruse, some were outraged, some were confused, though most were relieved that they wouldn't be getting expelled. The rest of the day went fairly smoothly for UA standards, anyway. Present mic was obnoxiously loud and midnight was far too risque considering she was talking to high school students, but that was just how they were, and it was nice to see them again, even if it was when they were in full-blown hero mode. All throughout the day, Ida found his eyes wandering back over to the black-haired boy, watching him during the 50-meter dash, the softball throw, grip strength, everything. Now that he wasn't wearing the uniform blazer, Ida could see that the boy's elbows were strangely bulky and could shoot tape from them. How interesting. Later on in present mixed English class, he learned the boy's name. SeriIida. But even his name was pretty. Unfortunately, Siro's prettiness was far too intimidating for him to approach at any point in time throughout the day. How could he? Siro had such a relaxed aura around him, begging for people to stop and stay a while. Ida was the exact opposite, uptight, fast, and sometimes downright unwelcoming. Besides, Ida's newfound crush, it was definitely a crush, was seemingly always surrounded by at least 2 of his friends, which was yet another difference between the two, considering Siro had already befriended half the class with a cheesy joke and a crooked smile, while Ida had only managed to make a few acquaintances and an enemy of the angry blonde boy Bakugo. Sighing, he stood and left the classroom at a brisk pace. Most classes had already assigned homework, and if he was fast he might be able to catch Tensei before he switched shifts. Rubbing his temple, Ida walked out of the building and looked out at the other students walking out in groups, when he spotted a familiar head of bouncy green curls and a strange brown bob. Clearing his throat, he walked up to the two, offering a smile and an introduction, silently cursing his own social ineptness. Surprisingly, they seemed happy to see him. That was new. The three of them walked out of school together, talking and laughing. Ida missed Tensei on the way home, but that seemed like a small price to pay for getting two new friends. The first day of school couldn't have started off worse for Zero. Starting off on the wrong foot didn't properly convey the chaos. It was more like he started off on the wrong foot, face planted, tried to get up and face planted again. That was better. To start off the day, he slept through his alarm, which completely SEKD, considering he went to bed half an hour early in a futile attempt to wake up on time, missing the ending of Beauty and the Beast in the process. Well, it didn't completely SEK, considering that his dreams were filled images of UA and a gorgeous blue-haired boy. Curse his hormones. So instead of waking up to the glorious anthem known as the Me Channel theme, he woke up to Reizo diving headfirst onto his bed. "Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up," he screamed into Hanta's ear, shaking his shoulders violently. When that didn't seem to work, Reizo resorted to jumping around on the bed, narrowly missing stepping on his older brother's face. I'm up, Hanta half yelled, sitting up just as Reizo had come back down to scream in his ear, resulting in a loud crack and both of them letting out a strangled noise. "You're rotten, Hanta," Reizo screeched, cupping his nose. "Sorry." But Reizo was already gone, having rolled off the bed and sprinted out of the room, running into the doorframe on the way out. As you do. Reaching over towards his nightstand, Hanta fumbled around for his phone, only succeeding in knocking it to the floor. Melting off the edge of the bed, he groped around for his phone, a strange feeling in his nose. He didn't need to sneeze, but it felt like something was building up. Oh no. Sitting straight back up, Hanta pinched his nose to stop blood from rolling out of it. What an excellent way to start the day. Barging into the bathroom, Hanta grabbed a tissue and stuffed it up the bleeding nostril, snatching up his toothbrush and the toothpaste in the process. The black-haired teen ran out of the bathroom and back into his room, pulling out the bits and pieces of his school uniform and putting them on, brushing his teeth at the same time. Deciding he didn't have time for his tie, Hanta opted to toss it around his neck like a pitiful scarf before scooping his phone up off the floor and heading back over to the bathroom. Spitting out his toothpaste and replacing the tissue stuffed up his nose, Hanta entered the kitchen with a loud sigh. "'Bout time you showed up, Sir Bedhead," Haruka said smugly, smirking into her glass of chocolate milk. "I really don't need this right now," he grumbled, stomping over to the fridge and flinging it open. He didn't need sass, he needed orange juice. "And we don't need you coming in here, half-dressed, drowning your sorrows in orange juice because you didn't wake up on time, yet here we are." Rolling his eyes, Hanta poured himself a glass of OJ and downed it. "Hanta, can you give me some OJ?" Yukari asked politely, batting her eyelashes. "I demand juice, Sir Bedhead," Reizo exclaimed, slamming his hands down on the table. "Please don't do that," Kaichi said flatly, casting an equally flat look at his brother. "I'm with Kai on this one," Konomi interrupted, placing 2 glasses down on the table and handing Hanta an egg sandwich. He accepted the sandwich gratefully and stuffed half of it into his mouth. Hanta poured the orange juice and returned the bottle to the fridge. "Today's your first day at UA, right?" "It's hard to tell, considering that your uniform is in shambles," Haruka said, smirking evilly. Scowling through his egg sandwich, Hanta gave her a rough noogie before disappearing back into his room, leaving an indignant little sister and a slightly disappointed mother behind. Quickly scarfing down the rest of his sandwich, the black-haired boy ran around like a chicken with its head cut off, raking a comb through his hair with one hand and packing his backpack with the other. Zipping up his bag and tossing the comb onto his bed, black eyes glanced down at a glowing phone screen, letting out a small breath of relief. He still had a few minutes before he was completely screwed and completely missed his first day at UA because he missed the train. Exiting his room, Hanta passed the kitchen and threw a wave over his shoulder. "I'll see you guys after school, love you." His fingers were mere centimeters away from the doorknob when his mother grabbed her son by the shoulders and spun him around. Ma, I have to go. Hanta exclaimed, trying to pull away as he fumbled for the doorknob. You need to say goodbye to your mother, Konomi said, a mischievous look in her eye. And actually put on your tie. Alright. The tie. Before Hanta could do anything, his mother had grabbed the red strip of cloth and was winding it around his neck, tying it with experienced fingers. Thanks, Mama, but I really do have to go, Hanta insisted, left hand closed around the doorknob while the right one worked on the deadbolt. You need to have a good day and try your best, okay? I'll try. That's all I can ask for. Konomi straightened her son's tie, pressed a kiss to his cheek, then shooed him out the door, a fond smile on her face. Sero booked it down the sidewalk, refraining from using his tape because if a police officer or a pro hero caught him, he would definitely be late for school. And that would SCK. So he resorted to running and yelling apologies to people that he ran into, which was a lot. Unfortunately for him, running down a crowded sidewalk wasn't a good idea. In fact, it was a recipe for disaster, considering how uncoordinated Sero could be at times. So as he darted around a young woman, Sero's foot caught on a crack in the sidewalk, and the next thing he knew, there was concrete pushed up against his cheek. Big up. But he didn't have time for pain, so Sero jumped back up onto his feet, dusted off his breathes and went right back to running down the sidewalk. Because he didn't learn his lesson, that's why. Once Sero got to the station, he nearly fell down the stairs and almost missed the train, and when he did get on the train, he got to experience what a sardine felt like. It wasn't great. Once he escaped from his tightly packed prison, Sero encountered a new problem. A very big problem. He didn't know where the hell he was supposed to be going. Well, he knew he was supposed to go to. He wasn't that dumb. The problem lay in the fact that Sero didn't know where the school was. How do you even get lost when going to UA? It was one of the largest and most recognizable buildings in the country, for crying out loud. Fortunately, Sero wasn't the only student who was a complete idiot. What a complete relief. Yo, are you lost too? Sero whipped around to find the owner of the voice, who turned out to be a short boy that had a black lightning bolt-shaped streak in his obnoxiously bright blonde hair. He had a cheerful yet relaxed expression on his face. He was kinda cute, but the important part was that he was also wearing a UA uniform. Somehow, Sero admitted, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. Looks like we're in the same boat, bro. Wanna be lost together? The stranger offered, coming up to stand next to Sero. I mean, sure. Cool. They started walking down the street together, heads swiveling from left to right like complete idiots. At that moment in time, Sero had a decent thought for once in his life. A brain blast, if you must. So he did the only rational thing. Took out his phone and opened Google Maps. It was the only thing that could save them now. Oh, I just realized I never asked your name, Sero said to the boy as they took a left. I'm Kaminari. Who are you? Sero. Cool. Kaminari fired off a pair of finger guns, winking. Oh, this boy was definitely a disaster buy. After a few more turns, UA's iconic arch came into view, and both of the boys let out a sigh of relief. Now, they could only be late if they tried really hard. A slightly awkward silence fell between them as they walked through said gate, along with a few other students who seemed to be on board with possibly being late. They entered the school and got pointed in the right direction by a well-meaning upperclassman who could tell they were freshmen. Honestly, it was kinda obvious, being the bumbling idiots they were. No second or third year could manage to look this lost. After thanking the upperclassmen, they started down the correct hallway, passing a few other students on their way. So, you guys look cool. In unison, Kaminari and Sero turned around to see a girl running towards them, a grin on her face. If there was one word Sero could use to describe her, it would be pink. In all caps. Possibly italicized. She had little yellow horns sticking out of her curly pink hair. Her eyes had black sclera and golden irises, which contrasted well with her pink skin. Thanks. Sero said, scratching the back of his head. You look cool too. I'm Kaminari and this is Sero. Who are you? Dude, that rhymed. Yeah, it totally did. That's impressive. The girl shimmied up next to Sero, a gleam in her slightly creepy eyes. I'm Ishido Mina. I'm headed to Class 1A. What about you guys? Kaminari's face lit up. Yo, I'm in 1A too. Same story here, Sero admitted, eyebrows raising slightly. That's a lucky coincidence. What are your quirks? Ashido asked. Mine's acid. Heh, nice, Kaminari commented, smirking devilishly. I wish, but it's not that kind of acid. That's no fun. But anyway, mine's electrification, which is really just a fancy way to say I can shoot lightning from my fingers. Ooh. I don't have a lot of control over it though. That's okay, dude. I mean, we're here to learn about that kind of stuff, right? You'll learn how to use it better. I'm not that good at learning though, I'm smart enough to realize that. I don't know how I managed to pass the written exam. Don't worry, Kaminari. Everyone has different strengths. You just have to use those strengths to cover your weaknesses, Ashido cut in, grinning from ear to ear. Thanks, Dedet, it means a lot. Don't mention it. Everyone needs a little encouragement from time to time. Ashido turned her attention to Sero. What's your quirk? I can shoot tape out of my elbows. Sero shrugged. Which is kinda lame, but it's handy for patching up the mistakes in my life, like my B-arch. We're best friends now, whether you like it or not, Kaminari announced, making such intense eye contact that it kind of freaked Sero out. I mean, sure. Do you think you can use your tape to piece together the failing relationship with my mom? Ashido asked, smirking playfully. I can try. Thanks, dude. Sero half-heartedly listened to Kaminari talk about how excited he was, Ashido bringing up someone called Kirishima, who was from the same junior high school as her, and apparently was also in 1A. Who else would be in their class? Would the blue-haired boy be there? He hoped so. They came upon the giant door to Class 1A and they walked in without hesitation, Ashido gesturing wildly, Kaminari laughing loudly. Sero pulled himself back to attention, tuning into the dumb story Ashido was telling as they walked over to one of the desks, Kaminari interrupting Ashido's story with one of his own. Sero started to scan the room. Might as well see who he'd be spending the rest of his UA days with, right? There was a girl with a spiky ponytail, a boy with 6 arms, a floating school uniform, and a blue-haired boy with glasses looking straight at him, an adoring look on his face. Wait, what? The boy's face lit up a violent crimson and he ripped his glasses off of his face, starting to clean them violently. If he had been hot from across a crowded auditorium, then the boy was downright heavenly up close. He was built like an absolute truck, had a freaking undercut, and from what Sero had seen of his eyes, they were appealing. Dear God, was his heart trying to explode? Because goddamn it sure felt like it. His heart couldn't take this. It couldn't take a few dozen seconds of looking at this boy, much less 3 years of watching him get progressively buffer. This was going to be interesting. Oh, and he was buff as hell. Goddamn. Those arms. The blue-haired boy was still curled in on himself, and from what Sero could see of his face, his blush was dying down. He just wanted to spend the rest of his days looking at this boy and telling him how perfect he was. But he wanted to do that to a lot of people. Diminu hormos. Besides, that was a little creepy, considering he didn't even know the boy's name. DMNU social standards. Reluctantly, Sero turned back to the conversation. Even though he wanted to spend the rest of his days looking at that appealing face, he didn't want to be caught staring even more, so he turned back towards Kaminari. And so then my aunt, who should not have had kids by the way, walks in on my cousin, her nephew, pouring root beer into my mouth to see how much of the bottle the dozen marshmallows in my mouth would absorb, while her 5-year-old daughter was attempting to eat a poker chip. Oh, and I had a marshmallow stuffed into each ear, because I was tired of listening to the football game my deadbeat uncle was watching at max volume upstairs. Ashido was doubled over, clutching her stomach and howling with laughter. Kaminari shook his head and let out a low whistle. Man, Easter is wild. At that, Sero joined Ashido in the laughing like a lunatic club, wheezing and guffawing and snorting like 4 times throughout it. It was totally embarrassing if he was being honest. He covered his mouth and gave off one last snort before he stopped laughing. Ashido wheezed a few more times and wiped away a stray tear before standing up. Jesus on a unicycle, I need more of these stories and I need them now, she demanded, still giggling slightly. Why a unicycle? Kaminari asked. Because unicycles are cool, that's why. Fair point. But tricycles are equally as cool, Sero butted in. And why is that? Ashido challenged, raising a pink eyebrow. Because tricycles start with try, so they're trying to be cool like me, and you just gotta throw them a bone every once in a while. Ashido giggled and Kaminari nodded thoughtfully. That's true, but bicycles are great because they're bi, and bi people are valid, Kaminari said, offering up a quick hair flip. Oh, if this boy wasn't a disaster bi before, he definitely was one now. Preach it, brother. Ashido said, snapping sassily. Was she a disaster bi? It was up in the air. Suddenly, she started hopping from foot to foot excitedly, squealing behind her excited grin. She waved someone over animatedly, grin getting even wider. Kirishima. It's so good to see you again. Your hair looks amazing. Ashido ran over and wrapped her arms around a boy, delivering a crushing hug. He had spiky red hair that was definitely held up by gel. No one's hair was that gravity-defying. Ashido broke away from the hug, and the boy broke out into a grin. Oh dang. His teeth were razor-sharp, and Sero didn't know whether to be intimidated or impressed. Instantly, dumb questions sprung into Sero's mind. How did he brush his teeth? How many toothbrushes had he destroyed? Could he eat vegetables well? Did it have to do with his quirk? Did his dentist hate him, or see the teeth as more of a challenge? But he shooed those questions out of his head. He could ask them later. So he decided on a more reasonable question. Who are you? I'm Kirishima. You guys look really manly, he said, banging his fists together, which made a strange sound. Thanks, dude, you look pretty manly too. Kirishima grinned even wider, and Kaminari launched into another crazy story, waving his hands around wildly. Sero scratched the back of his head and smiled softly. Class hadn't even started and he was already making new friends. That seemed like a good sign. But that was unexpected. To start it off, their teacher looked like a straight-up hobo, his classmates were crazy strong, one of the boys broke his finger on the softball throw, and one of the girls got infinity. How many people had gotten infinity before that it was a setting? To say their first day was hardcore was an understatement. At the end of the day, Sero was tired, sweaty, and just generally done with life. Well, more so than usual, at least. Somehow, Ashido still had energy left over and was still twirling around excitedly as she, Sero, Kaminari, Kirishima and a girl they befriended named Jiro left school together. It was weird having this many friends, especially this many high-energy friends, but not entirely unwelcome. Well, Jiro was about as far from high energy as you could get, and that was a relief. He needed someone more laid back to balance things out. Soon enough, everyone started branching off, Kaminari disappearing first, then Kirishima and Ashido leaving together. He and Jiro walked in comfortable silence for a while, both pumping obnoxiously loud music into their ears. They walked to the subway station together, though unfortunately they had to part ways there. So with a small wave, Sero watched her disappear into the crowd before turning around and heading towards his platform. Once he was sandwiched between a tired businessman and a woman who smelled like wet dog food, Sero allowed his mind to wander. It was the only thing he really wanted to do right now, because that woman smelled really bad. Throughout the day, Sero had learned more and more about the blue-haired boy. He was the tiniest bit taller than Sero himself. He had engines in his calves. He seemed pretty strict at first sight, but Sero didn't even know him that well. Though Sero could use some enforced rules in his life, there was still a ton of time left to get to know him, which brought up the issue that Sero didn't even have the courage to talk to the boy. How could he? The angel in disguise was just so intimidating. Well, intimidating wasn't the right word, but he couldn't think of a better one, so he was sticking with it. And during English, he even learned the blue-haired beauty's name. Ida Tenya. Even his name was dreamy. God, Sero was so screwed. As the train came to a screeching halt, and the woman that smelled like dog food left, Sero made himself a promise. He would talk to Ida tomorrow, no matter what. Having friends was a whole lot nicer than Tenya could have ever imagined. They made everything so much better. Midoriya and Uraraka's cheerful attitudes seemed to have rubbed off on him, so much so that he barely registered the fact he missed Tensei on his way home. His parents came home an hour late, throwing his schedule out the window, but his bright attitude didn't leave him. Even when they sat down at the dinner table, his parents were too absorbed in their work to notice his smile. So he just opted to eat his dinner quickly and excuse himself even quicker, hiding out in his room amongst his books and cheerful attitude. Unfortunately, no matter how many times he tried to concentrate on page 162 of Murder on the Orient Express, he just couldn't. Tenya's thoughts just kept wandering back to how excited Midoriya and Uraraka had been to see him. He had friends. People who really cared about him and wanted to be around him. It was amazing. More than amazing, actually. Much more. Astounding, astonishing, fantastic, stupefying, and hundreds more synonyms that Tenya couldn't think of in the moment. God, he couldn't wait until Tensei got home. He would love to hear about his little brother's day. He'd ask about how Aizawa started class, probably snort loudly, shake his head and scold Hisashi for buying Aizawa that cursed sleeping bag back when they were teenagers. He'd tell Tensei about all of his classmates and their quirks, which ones had kept up with Uncle Hisashi's energetic attitude, which ones made friends the quickest, which ones placed best in the apprehension test. He'd definitely tell his brother all about their quirks. And when he explained how he made his first real friends, Tensei would smile proudly and ruffle his hair. Would he tell Tensei about his crush? Would he tell him it was Zero? Probably not, considering that Tensei knew just about all the teachers at UA, and would definitely do a background check. It would be ridiculously embarrassing, but Tenya wouldn't have it any other way. Just talking to Tensei made him feel better. But he couldn't always rely on Tensei. No matter how hard he tried, Tensei couldn't always be there for him. Besides, Tenya didn't need to add more to his brother's plate. He had enough to worry about with his hero work. He didn't need to spend what little free time he had fretting about what his little brother was doing. Despite all of this, Tensei would be so proud of him right now. New friends, placing well in the quirk apprehension test, a crush for crying out loud. Tenya was becoming more and more like a normal teenager by the second. It was very strange, and he wasn't sure if he liked all the parts of being a normal teenager, but most of them were purely beneficial. But soon enough, the sun had sunk down below the horizon, and there was still no sign of his brother. So Tenya made a mental note to tell Tensei about everything that happened another day and tucked himself into bed, dreaming of two bubbly, upbeat friends and a certain black-haired boy. The next few days passed in a somewhat dreamlike state, some events leaving much too fast, others dragging on for what felt like years. There was the heroes versus villains training where Midoriya broke his arm just like he had in the entrance exam. What was his quirk and why was it causing such a physical backlash on him? Iida would hate for his brand new friend to be constantly rushing off to Recovery Girl. Hopefully this wouldn't become a trend. Then there was the election, the break-in, Midoriya handing over the position of class president to Iida. It was an eventful few days, to say the least. So of course Aizawa decided to put even more on their minds and into their schedules. I can't believe Aizawa is springing a test on us now. Everything's been so crazy lately, why can't he just let us take a break for a few days? Uraraka complained, bottom lip jutting out in a pout as she slouched over. Iida looked up from his orange juice and across the table at her, face set in its usual stern expression. I understand your dismay, Uraraka, but you must remember that we are at the top heroing school in the country. It is Aizawa's job to prepare us for the world of heroes. Iida exclaimed, chopping the air like a madman. But what does giving us a test out of nowhere have to do with us becoming heroes? A hero always has a busy schedule. Patrols and public appearances are only a minuscule fraction of their full workload. This test could be his way of preparing us for such a burden. That probably wasn't true, but Iida wasn't just going to let his new friend mope around like this. Everything has a lesson if you look hard enough. So he's just trying to prepare us that way. How unorthodox. Midoriya cut in, looking up from his rice and smiling brightly. Aizawa is fairly unorthodox, in more ways than one. Iida agreed quietly, silently cringing at all the strange encounters he had with the eraser hero in his younger years. I guess that's true. Uraraka let out a loud sigh. But that doesn't change the fact that this test is going to stink. Oh, come on Uraraka. I'm sure it won't be that bad. Midoriya assured her. It's completely new stuff that we've barely covered. I'm going to do horrible on that test and Aizawa will expel me, I just know it. She sighed again and dropped her forehead to the lunch table with a loud thunk. Wide blue and red eyes darted over to look at Midoriya, who was just staring at her, freckled face a mix of shock, worry, and discomfort. Obviously this wasn't his area of expertise. Unfortunately for Uraraka, it wasn't Iida's either. But giving up wasn't very heroic, so he decided to take matters into his own overly large hands, no matter how horribly inept he was at comforting people. If you're really that worried, Uraraka, I could help you study, Iida offered. He may be a fish out of water when it came to people, but he knew how to study. He could help with that. Really? She asked hopefully, bringing her head up off the table and looking at him with slightly watery eyes. Of course. I would hate for you to fail, and learning property study habits early in the year will be most beneficial. Uraraka broke into a grin and clapped her hands together. Thank you so much, Iida. I don't know what I'd do without you. There is no need to thank me, Uraraka, I'm simply helping out a friend. Because friends were supposed to help one another out. That's what friends did. He was really good at this. I should probably review some too, Midoriya admitted, face much more relaxed. Ooh, we should all study together. Uraraka was back to her usual bubbly self. What a relief. That's an excellent idea. Where should we meet up? Midoriya asked, eyebrows knit together. The library? Uraraka suggested. I wouldn't want to disturb anyone though, we can get kinda loud. That's true. So maybe we should meet at someone's house? Maybe we could go to yours, Deku. Midoriya waved his hands around frantically, face turning red. Well, that isn't really a good idea. Why not? My mom can be kinda overbearing, and I wouldn't want her to freak you guys out or anything, so, well. As Midoriya fumbled for an excuse, Iida frowned slightly, eyebrows drawing together. What would it be like to have an overbearing mother? He couldn't even imagine it, the idea was so foreign. Midoriya was still rambling, Uraraka starting to look a little uncomfortable herself. Clearing his throat loudly, Iida placed a hand over his heart and puffed out his chest. We could go to my house if you two are up to it. Really? Uraraka asked, as Midoriya stopped his rambling. Yes, there is plenty of space and my family is usually away at work, so we should be free to be as loud as we want. Midoriya let out a sigh of relief and cast a grateful look towards his friend as Uraraka clapped her hands excitedly, grinning broadly. Thanks so much, Iida, she chirped, smile somehow getting even wider. When should we meet up? Oh, I can't tonight, I have something to do, Midoriya said lamely, looking slightly uncomfortable. That's okay. So maybe tomorrow? Does that sound good, Iida? He nodded stiffly. Yes. That works for me too. I'll let my mom know tonight. Great. Now I'll actually have a chance to pass. Thank you guys so much. Midoriya stuttered out a "you're welcome," and Iida smiled to himself as Uraraka launched into some long-winded story about one of the pranksters back at her junior high. This was nice. Really, really nice. He really had been missing out, hadn't he? He turned back to Uraraka just as she was explaining how her friend Ito managed to hide underneath the teacher's desk while he was sitting at it to avoid revealing the entire scheme to him. Ito shuddered. Pranks were not his forte, not by a long shot. But he constantly was the butt of the joke back in junior high, so he supposed he was part of the pranks in a roundabout way. And that's how the rest of lunch went. Uraraka bouncing around from story to story, the two boys listening intently, Midoriya sometimes chipping in with a story of his own, Ida interrupting with an interesting fact. But much too soon, the bell rang, and they were forced to go back to class. Ida watched all of his classmates trickle in through the door, Shoji and Tokoyami entering together, talking quietly, Aoyama strutting in, head held high, posing dramatically, Todoroki walking in alone, eyes dull and uninterested, Tsu shuffling into class with a bouncing Hagakure. But then Bakugo burst into the room, somehow even more set off than usual. "Leave me alone, you extras," he shouted over his shoulder. Ida's head snapped over towards the door. Who would Bakugo speak to in such a horrid manner? Why were these people following him? Kirishima came in through the door, grinning broadly. Well, that was believable. From what little he knew about Kirishima, the red-haired boy seemed the type to go after the most callous, violent, unstable person in the class and become his friend. If anything, Iida admired his determination. God knows he didn't have that kind of iron will. The door swung open again, and in stumbled Kaminari and Mina. Both of them were doubled over, faces bright red as they very poorly attempted to suppress their laughter behind their hands. Kaminari was elbowing Mina in the ribs roughly as she leaned heavily on his shoulder, half whispering something into his ear. The blonde boy burst into another fit of laughter as they continued following Bakugo, whose face was getting redder and redder by the second. Coming up from behind them was a very familiar, very gorgeous face. Sero was chuckling, hands behind his head, mouth set in its usual crooked grin as he strolled into class casually. How could he be so relaxed when someone was yelling at him? How could anyone be relaxed when Bakugo was yelling at them? How could anyone look that pretty when Bakugo was yelling at them? Sero carefully steered Kaminari and Mina, keeping them from slamming into Hagakure's desk. "Leave me alone, you fucktards." Bakugo barked, sparks flying off of his palms. "Hard pass," Mina squeaked out, pointing at Kirishima before dissolving back into giggles. Bakugo grit his teeth and moved a middle finger in their direction. "You know you love us," Kaminari teased, smirking cheekily. "Why would someone like me waste my time with FING losers like you? I'm not here to make friends." Kirishima, Sero, Kaminari and Mina exchanged knowing, mischievous looks. "Whatever you say, Baku bro," Kirishima chirped, pounding his fists together excitedly. Apparently, this was a mistake. With a loud shout, Bakugo slammed his fists on the nearest desk, screaming bloody murder at them, words barely coherent as he howled. Iida stood abruptly. How could he have let this happen? It was his job as class president to keep things like this from happening. He should have intervened as soon as Bakugo entered the room in a horribly sour mood. Walking through the rows of desks, Iida opened his mouth to scold Bakugo, but someone beat him to it. "Bakugo, do you really think that exploding the desks are going to make you number one? 'Cause the only thing it's gonna do is stick you in detention." "Shut it, plain face," Bakugo screeched, though he did stop destroying the desks. Sero just shrugged and smiled crookedly. Plain face? What a horrible nickname. Sero's face might have been a little plain, but he was gorgeous nonetheless. Puffing out his chest, Iida started lecturing Bakugo about proper conduct, quirk usage, respect towards his fellow classmates, so and so forth. Eventually, Midnight interrupted them by entering the room and ordering everyone back to their desks. After everyone had settled down into their desks, Sero turned around and gave Iida a small smile, before turning back towards the front of the room where Midnight had already begun the lesson. Iida would describe himself as prepared for anything life could throw his way. Well, almost anything. He wasn't ready for his particularly strange classmates, going into the hero world, Sero, and a lot of other things. Right now though, he was nervously tapping his fingers against his thigh as he scanned the subway car, praying that Uraraka didn't get lost, and that Midoriya didn't get crushed before they reached his house. Thankfully, they managed to get off of the subway largely unscathed, though Uraraka did lose 2 pages of notes to a rude man that slammed into her. She was moping about the lost papers, while Midoriya tried his best to cheer her up, which involved a lot of hand-waving, stuttering, and apologizing. Gulping, Iida led the way towards his house. He wasn't ready for this. But much sooner than he would have liked, his neighborhood came into view, then his house. Uraraka and Midoriya followed him like little ducklings as he walked up to his house and unlocked the door, stepping aside to let his friends in first. "Wow, Iida, your house is really nice," Uraraka exclaimed as she took off her shoes, Midoriya doing the same. "Thank you, Uraraka," he said, closing the door and locking it swiftly, removing his own shoes. The 3 of them walk into the living room, bags in hand. "So, where do you guys want to start?" Midoriya asked as they settled down at the coffee table, an air of awkward silence between them. "I will go get snacks," Iida announced, standing up abruptly. "You two should get all your notes out and decide on your own." They nodded and started to unzip their bags as Ida swiftly fled to the kitchen. Once he was out of sight, he smiled widely and bustled about, filling up the kettle and placing it on the stove. Bustling around, Ida took in deep breaths through his nose and exhaled through his mouth. This was going to be great. He just knew it. After the tea and snacks were ready, Ida returned to the living room, tray in hand. Midoriya and Uraraka looked up, and instantly, their faces broke into grins. "Thanks, Ida." Uraraka chirped as he placed the tray down on the table. Once everyone had a cup of tea in hand and Uraraka had eaten half of the pretzels, they started. "God, my brain feels like it's all melted," Uraraka exclaimed, draping herself on the table. "Uraraka, that isn't possible," Ida chastised her, pulling a page out from under her arm. "If you don't let us take a break, it'll spill out of my ears and get all over your carpet," she said, looking up at him with pleading eyes. Midoriya let out a small chuckle from across the table. After glancing between Uraraka's puppy dog eyes and Midoriya's hopeful smile, Ida let out a long sigh. "I suppose a break is in order," he relented. Immediately, Uraraka shot up and started dancing around the room excitedly. She whirled around to face the boys. "What should we do? How long can the break be? Where's the bath?" Her last question was cut off by a sickening crunch and a high-pitched scream. Instantly, Ida was on his feet and rushing over to Uraraka, who was hopping on one foot, holding the other in her hands. "Ow! Ow!" she shrieked with every hop, usually cheery face pulled into an ugly grimace. "Uraraka, what happened?" he asked, helping her down onto the couch. "Oh, don't worry," she said through clenched teeth. "I just stubbed my toe." She gave her best attempt at a smile, but it was quite terrifying. Midoriya rushed over, a worried expression on his face. "Is it bad?" "No. It's fine, I promise," Uraraka said, even though she was still wincing and squeezing her foot unusually tight. "I find that difficult to believe. Shall I go get the first aid kit?" "What?" No, it's okay. Based on your facial expression, I am not inclined to believe you." Instantly, her awkward grimace turned into a shaky grin. "If you're sure it's not that bad, then maybe we should just ice it?" Midoriya suggests. Uraraka let out a sigh of relief. "Yeah, that'll be good." Ida nodded stiffly and shot off towards the kitchen. Their first time hanging out after school, and Uraraka injures herself. Sighing, he opens the freezer and pulls out an ice pack. Hopefully, things would only get better from here. He stepped back into the living room and handed the ice pack off to Uraraka, who accepted it gratefully. After a bit more review, Midoriya glanced up at the clock and blanched. "I'm sorry, but I really have to go," he apologized, scrambling to pick all of his things. "Don't worry about it, Deku," Uraraka chirped. "I should probably be getting home myself." They both packed their things and put on their shoes, waving goodbye over their shoulders. Closing the door, Tenya smiled broadly. That was really nice. He walked back into the living room. He picked up the tea tray and the ice pack, which was now lukewarm. Putting the ice pack back into the freezer, the bespectacled teen stood at the sink and started scrubbing the dishes. Closing his eyes, Tenya just listened. Everything was so quiet. That's how it always was. But when Midoriya and Uraraka were here, the house was filled with laughter and bad jokes and happiness. Only when Tensei was present did the house sound like that. Well, now his friends and his brother filled the house with happiness. It was really nice. He resumed his scrubbing, filling the air with sounds of bacterial destruction. "Tenya, I'm home." Tenya's face broke into a grin and turned around, plate still in hand. "It's good to see you, Tensei." His brother entered the kitchen and ruffled his hair playfully. "How've you been?" "Good. Great. Spectacular, even." "Is that so? What happened while I was gone?" Tenya stopped scrubbing the dishes, a slight frown gracing his face. "A lot, actually. I'm assuming that you heard about the break-in?" Tensei nodded. "Yeah. I'm pretty sure everyone in Japan knows about that. What else happened?" "Well, one of my friends broke his arm during training. I became class president. Aizawa gave everyone quite the scare on the first day, and I think I might have a crush of some sorts." Even with his back turned, Tenya could feel excitement and pride radiating off of his brother in waves. A few beats of silence passed. "Oh, come on, Tenya. You can't just leave me hanging like that." Putting down the scrubber, the younger Ida turned away from the sink. "It's quite a bit to discuss. We've got nothing but time." Sero didn't end up talking to Ida the next day. Or the day after that. Or the day after that. In fact, he hadn't talked to Ida at all since school started. The only thing he managed to do was give him a small smile after Bakugo almost destroyed some desks, which kinda is because Sero was like 86% sure that Ida missed the smile. But how in the entire Milky Way galaxy was he supposed to talk to the blue-eyed beauty? Ida was amazing in every single way, and Sero was just himself. Ida had already made friends with Uraraka and Midoriya, got MVP during the Crazy Heroes vs. Villains battles All Might made them do, calmed down everyone in the hallway when the school's alarm system went off, and became class president. All in the span of the first week. Not to mention that his hero suit made him a literal knight in shining armor. So while he wasn't exactly happy that he couldn't build up the courage to talk to Ida, Sero was content hanging out with his friends, who had their hearts dead set on making Bakugo part of their little squad. Sero didn't really care either way, but if he's learned one thing from having younger siblings, it's that letting them learn on their own, and letting them keep themselves occupied is the best way to do things. But thankfully, not all their time as a group was spent chasing after Bakugo like a gaggle of lost puppies. So that led him to now, waking up with a serious case of bedhead and a dry throat. Dragging himself out of bed, he opened his door cautiously, stepping around the creaky floorboards as he traversed his way down the hallway towards the kitchen. Once there, he shuffled around in the dark, navigating the space through muscle memory alone. Grabbing 2 mugs from the cabinet, he made 2 cups of tea, one of which he took a long, satisfied sip from. "Good morning, Hanta," a sweet voice said. "Mornin' mama," he said, handing her the other mug. "Good morning." Konomi took a long drink and sighed contentedly before turning to her son. "I want to talk to you before the little hellions wake up." "What do you want to talk about?" he asked as they walked over to the couch and sat down on the plush cushions. "Your time at school. I feel like I've been neglecting you as of late." "And neglecting me?" "What?" No, you haven't done anything wrong. We've just both been busy. And now we aren't busy, so tell me about you. Have you made any friends? How are your teachers? What training have you done so far?" Hanta's face broke into a grin. "Okay, so I got lost on the way to you, which was really bad, but luckily for me I wasn't the only one. Kaminari got lost too, and we found our way to UA together, and once there we met Ishido, who introduced us to Kirishima, and during training we met Jiro, who's super chill and has good taste in music." "Is that so?" Most of my classmates are pretty chill." "Most of them?" Hanta gulped. "Yeah. One of the boys is really loud and violent, and my friends have made it their mission to make him part of our group." Konomi snorted. "Well, they do sound like quite the raucous bunch, but as long as they don't get you into too much trouble, I'm sure you'll be fine." "Yeah, that's fair." "Now, how has training been?" "Hard. I noticed that much. After your first day you came home and immediately passed out on the couch." Hanta laughed sheepishly. "That's true, but I totally had a reason." "Did you now?" "Yes." Aizawa threatened to expel the person who came in last place. It was crazy. Everyone was running on adrenaline the entire day. Konomi took a thoughtful sip of tea, silver eyes trained on her son. "It's not all that crazy in my opinion." "What are you talking about?" Hanta screeched, banging his mug down on the table. "He said he'd expel someone on the first day, and if that isn't crazy then I don't know what is." His mother simply shook her head. "Hanta, you have to realize that you're training to become heroes. Heroes get hurt and die in the field. That's a plain and simple fact. By the sounds of it, Aizawa is just looking out for you. The threat of expulsion kicked you all into high gear, making sure you would give it your all. To put it bluntly, he's checking for weak spots, and either dropping them or cultivating them especially well." Konomi took another long drink, draining the mug. "Well, that's what I think anyway. After you clean up the tea you spilled on the coffee table, I want you to help me with breakfast. Considering everyone else should be up soon, with all the yelling we did. She stood and picked up Hanta's now empty mug, retreating into the kitchen. Snagging some paper towels from underneath the sink, he started to mop up the tea as Kaichi entered the room, large bags under his eyes. Mornikai. Sleep well. No. That stinks. Can I help? Kaichi blinked slowly. French toast would help. Hanta stood up, sopping wet paper towels in hand. Right on it. After throwing the towels away, Hanta joined his mother in the kitchen. Kai wants French toast. Alrighty. Do you want to get started on that? Sure thing. Mama, I'm heading out. Siro called into the house, pulling on one of his shoes. Where are you going? Yukari asked, looking up from the colorful puzzle she was piecing together. Just meeting up with some friends, he said, standing up and pocketing his phone. Are they friends from UA? Yup. Her face lit up. That's cool. What are their names? Yuka, stop bothering him. Reizo barked at her. He'll leave faster if you stop talking. Oh. She blinked. Well, go have fun. Don't worry, I will, he reassured her, stepping out onto the front porch and waving goodbye. Siro walked through the streets, head swerving from side to side, searching for a head of ridiculously bright blonde hair. Siro! Someone slammed onto his side and pulled him into a tight hug, squealing slightly. Hi, he squeaked out as Ishido squeezed even tighter. You're going to cut off the blood flow to his brain if you don't let him go, Jiro said, casting her pink-skinned friend a disapproving glance. Reluctantly, Ishido let him go. Taking in a deep breath, Siro looked around at his friends. Kaminari was whispering into a very concerned-looking Kirishima's ear. Jiro was lazily twirling an earphone jack around her finger while scrolling through her phone, and Ishido was hopping from foot to foot excitedly. Kirishima pulled away from Kaminari and waved. Sup, dude? Not much, I guess. But that's all about to change, isn't it, Kami? Ishido interrupted, giggling. You bet, he replied, snickering behind his hand. What are we doing? Where are we going? Kirishima asked excitedly, banging his fists together. We're here to make a good impression. Kaminari exclaimed, shaking the redhead's shoulders roughly. Do I want to know what that means? Siro asked, glancing around nervously. Yes. Ishido stood on her tiptoes and peered over the crowd. Kami and I got some info from Midoriya, and apparently Bakugo's supposed to be here. Jiro looked up from her phone, an unimpressed look on her face. He's ignoring you at school. He doesn't ignore us, he yells at us. That means he's acknowledging our existence. Fine, let me rephrase that. He yells at you guys whenever you try to talk to him at school, so you followed him outside of school and you think that's going to go any better. Yup. God, Kaminari, you really are an idiot. He just shrugged. I get that a lot. Focus, Kami. We need to find Bakugo. Ishido screeched before turning to Kirishima. Kiri, you need to give me a piggyback ride so we can find him easier. He stepped back a little, laughing nervously. I don't really think that's a good idea. Siro, give me a piggyback ride. As long as you don't fall off, I'm okay with it. Ishido pumped a fist and clambered onto Siro's back, scanning the crowd. You're a lot lighter than I thought you'd be, he commented as they started making their way down the sidewalk. Hey, that was mean. Ishido squealed, hitting her personal taxi on the head with a pink fist as Jiro stabbed him with one of her jacks. That's not what I meant, he said, wincing. I meant like because you're so muscular, Ishido. Because muscle weighs more than fat and all that. Oh, well, that makes sense. She rubbed his head in apology. Oh, you guys can call me Mina if you want. I can't believe I forgot to mention that. Really? Up. Now, go left, I want to see if he's in the next street over. Siro nodded and obliged, even though he couldn't help himself from rolling his eyes a little bit. He didn't really get why his friends wanted to make friends with Bakugo so badly, but at least they had spirit or whatever. How much longer would they search? 5 minutes? He didn't have to worry too much about that though, because the next thing he knew, Mina was banging on his head roughly, squealing. He's here. He's here. He is. Kirishima asked, glancing around curiously. Over there. She stopped her onslaught against Sero's skull to point forward, where two heads of spiky ash blonde hair could be seen. Probably Bakugo and one of his parents. Bingo. Mina slapped Sero on the arm. Go faster. We're so close. Sero obliged, Kaminari smirking to his left, Kirishima grinning dopily to his right, Jiro shaking her head disapprovingly, yet trailing behind them nonetheless. As they neared the scene, Sero realized three things. 1. It definitely was Bakugo. 2. He was arguing loudly with someone. 3. The other person was arguing back just as loudly. Katsuki, you little brat. Why can't you just have one normal day? The other person, a woman, by the sound of her voice, barked loudly. Shut it, you old hag, he yelled back. I don't need this from you right now. You never need me to tell you the truth. She hit him on the head, scowling. Bakugo recoiled, hissing through his teeth, mouth opening to fire off another retort. Fancy seeing you here, Baku bro. Bakugo whipped towards them, a vein pulsing in his neck. Sparky, he growled, hands twitching like he wanted to wrap his hands around Kaminari's throat. Kaminari fired off a pair of finger guns, winking confidently. Sero had to give the madman some credit. He had bravery. Or a whole lot of stupidity. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. The woman had calmed down some, and as she looked them up and down, Sero immediately saw the resemblance. She was probably Bakugo's mom. He supposed bad tempers ran in the family. Ooh, Bakugo, is this your mom? It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Bakugo. Mina chirped, dropping off of Sero's back and walking to stand by Kaminari. Mrs. Bakugo just stood there, scowling face morphing into a look of confusion. Katsuki, she barked, who the hell are these kids? They're effing extras. We're Bakugo's friends, Kaminari said, grinning. From UA. Mina added, puffing out her chest proudly. The woman seemed almost taken aback for a moment before her face returned to a scowl. Is that so? She cast a glare down at her son. Why didn't you tell me about them? Katsuki? Because I don't have to tell you everything, old hag. You never tell me anything to begin with, you brat. I don't need to. I gave you life. I didn't ask for that. And I didn't ask for an ungrateful son, yet look where I am now. Bakugo's hands clenched into fists and he stepped forward, more pure, unadulterated rage in his eyes than Sero had ever seen, and was stopped by a hand on his shoulder. Kirishima smiled cheerily as Bakugo stared at the tanned hand resting innocently on his shoulder, probably too mad to do anything but glare. Yo dude, we were just going to go grab a bite to eat, wanna tag along? Bakugo's blood-red eyes darted from his mother to the group of teenagers, back to his mother, eventually landing on Kirishima. Shoving the redhead's hand off his shoulder, Bakugo huffed, turning on his heel. I'll be back later, you old hag. Mina and Kaminari looked at one another in disbelief, but quickly scurried after him. Sero joined Jiro and Kirishima in following him, no one exactly sure as to where he was leading them. Yo Baku bro, where are we going? Kaminari asked after they had walked through a few streets. Don't call me that. And quit following me, he spat, elbowing his way through a particularly dense patch of people. You could easily ditch us, so I don't see why you're wasting your time talking to us, Jiro stated in a deadpan voice. Bakugo grit his teeth. You dumbasses are never going to stop looking for me if I do. There's no point. Sero cleared his throat. I know this question might land me in the hospital, but if you hate us so much, why'd you come with us? It was either you extras or the old hag. Not much of a competition. At least you losers know your place. A few beats of eerie silence passed. You know, since you're already with us, why don't we actually go get something to eat? Mina suggested. I'd rather die than be seen in public with you. You're already in public with us. I didn't ask, Sparky. Come on, Baku bro. It'll be fun. Shut it, shitty hair. You won't even have to talk to us. The answer is no, Raccoon Eyes. Leave me the F alone. All three of them sighed loudly, defeated looks on their faces. It was time for Sero to put his older brother's skill set to use and do what he did best. Haggle with petulant children. You know, Bakugo, there's a lot of benefit to becoming friends with us. Mina, Kaminari, Kirishima and Jiro all gaped at Sero, probably wondering where he wanted to be buried, and what flowers he wanted on his casket. I don't need friends, and I especially don't need extras like you hanging around me like flies. I beg to differ. I don't. Shut up. Just think about it logically. I mean, you are ranked 3rd in the class for a reason, right? There's no logic there. Shut the f up. Sero clicked his tongue. If you're around us, we'll make you look even better. You'll make me look like a FNG weakling, that's what you'll do. You sure? Because I think our skill level will just make you look stronger by comparison. I'm not going to get compared to you extras. I'm in a league of my own. The black-haired boy nodded. That's true, yeah, but no matter what you do, you'll be compared to the other kids in class. There's nothing you can do about that. If you have something important to say, spit it out already. Since you're always going to be compared to everyone in class, it's better for you to be friends with us because of our diversity. Kirishima's our tank, Jiro's our stealth and recon, Mina's our DPS, Kaminari's our Hail Mary, I'm support and ranged, so we need a complete and utter powerhouse like you. You know what you want and we can help you get there. At this point, Bakugo had stopped walking, opting to stare Sero down, sizing him up. I don't need you. I know that, but we're going to make it a hell of a lot easier to get what you want. I don't need your pity. This isn't pity. Then what the hell is it? An offer. For friendship, teamwork, whatever. The specifics don't really matter. And if I do take this shitty offer, why the hell should I waste my free time going out to eat? Because that way we can discuss strategy outside of class, so we won't have to waste time during training. If we know one another's strengths and weaknesses beforehand, we can work around them. Are you saying I have weaknesses, because I don't? I'm talking about our weaknesses, Sero clarified, gesturing to his friends, not your non-existent ones. Bakugo scoffed, and didn't say anything else, but he didn't storm off either. Was he really thinking about this? Eventually, Bakugo sighed and scanned the group, an unimpressed look on his face. You've got yourself a deal, soy sauce. His expression morphed into disgust. But don't expect me to pick up any of your slack. The moment you start goofing off, I'm out. Kaminari and Mina looked at one another, squealing excitedly. Kirishima pumped a fist in the air, face split into the widest grin Sero had seen on him yet. Jiro allowed a minuscule smirk to pass over her lips as she gave Sero a small nod and an impressed raise of the eyebrow. Bakugo growled and turned on his heel. Tell those dumbass to stop squealing, tape face. It hurts my ears. Immediately, Kaminari and Mina shut up, though they were still waving their hands around and elbowing each other excitedly. Bakugo glanced over his shoulder, scowl having returned. What the hell are you losers waiting for? An invitation? Did you not hear what I said about pulling your own FING weight? That starts now, a-holes. Everyone scurried after him and Sero pinched himself to make sure this wasn't some crazy dream. Nope. 100% real. Where do you want to go eat, Bakugo? Kirishima asked, somehow having found the courage to walk right next to the ticking temper bomb. You tell me. Kirishima gulped nervously. What's that supposed to mean, bro? It means you extras should be able to make decisions here too. I can't be the only one doing shit. With each passing second, Bakugo was starting to sound more and more like a toddler. Ooh, how about we go get ice cream? Mina suggested, already salivating at the thought. I'm down. There's a really good place not too far from here, Sero said, gesturing vaguely off to the left. What do you guys think? Are you talking about that place with the spicy sorbet? Jiro asked, earning a nod in response. I tried that stuff once when I was a kid, she shuddered. Worst mistake I've ever made. I didn't even know something so cold could be so hot. Bakugo snorted. You're just a wimp, ears. Have you had it before? No. But I will. He smirked. Tape face, where's the stupid creamery? Apparently, everyone but Kirishima and Bakugo were wimps when it came to the spicy sorbet. Jiro refused to eat it, Kaminari screamed his head off when he tasted it, Mina started breakdancing to distract herself from the pain, Sero's face turned bright red as he banged his head on the table, and Kirishima grinned, saying it was really good and manly, attempting to get seconds before Bakugo smacked him upside the head and ordered him to get your own fucking food. All in all, it was a pretty good day. After a while, Bakugo even stopped screaming at them for no apparent reason, though he still had his moments. Hours of planning, bad jokes, and lots of ice cream later, Mina and Kirishima bid their goodbyes. Bakugo stomped off angrily, Kaminari booking it back towards his house, leaving Sero and Jiro standing awkwardly outside the creamery. So, do you know why the gaggle of idiots wants to hang out with Bakugo so badly? Jiro asked, twirling an earphone jack around her finger. Sero shrugged. I think I know, but I'm not entirely sure. Jiro ped a purple eyebrow, looking up at him through her bangs. Well, it's not like I know anything, but I think it's just because they can. Like, everyone else is avoiding Bakugo because he's a narcissistic a-hole, but maybe they see something in him that we don't. Jiro shrugged. I'd believe it. They're all a little weird. If it was anyone else, I'd say they're trying to use him. Like, ride off his success? On his tail or something? Sero scratched his chin. Isn't that a phrase? It's riding his coattails, and that's not really what I meant. Oh, sorry. I'm an idiot. No, you're not, and I mean like bragging rights. We managed to become friends with Bakugo, beat that. So you don't think they're annoying him into SBM's end to do that? Yeah. They just don't seem like the kind of people to do that. Kirishima's too kind-hearted, Kaminari's too dumb, and Mina just seems too happy-go-lucky to use someone for her own personal gain. Hey, don't discredit my bro like that. Be honest with yourself. Sero sighed. You win this time, Logic. Jiro snorted. I've got to say, you were pretty impressive back there. Huh. When you convinced Bakugo to hang out with us. It was really cool. The black-haired boy laughed sheepishly, cheeks turning pink. I wasn't really all that great. Whatever you say, Sero, she said, rolling her eyes. But I want to know how you did it. I just kinda talked to him like he was my 8-year-old brother. Sero shrugged. If I've learned one thing from having younger siblings, it's how to negotiate. Jiro laughed roughly. If there's one thing I've learned from being an only child, it's how to beg for something you really want. Sero snorted as he looked down at his phone, cringing at the time displayed on the screen. Sorry, but I have to get going. Don't sweat it. See you at school tomorrow? Hopefully. Jiro waved goodbye over her shoulder, and Sero waved back, smiling softly to himself. Ida took off his glasses and massaged the bridge of his nose, looking up and cracking his neck. The sound of pencils scratching on paper filled the room as his classmates fervently tried to recall the answers to the questions. As he glanced around, Ida saw a few other people had finished with their tests. Yaoyorozu was reading a book, Bakugo was picking at his nails, and Todoroki was staring ahead blankly. No surprise there. Skimming the rest of his classmates' faces, he saw expressions ranging from cheerful smiles to painful grimaces. As per usual, Ida found his eyes wandering over to Sero. His face was scrunched up in concentration, eyebrows drawn together, nose crinkled, hair falling in front of his face as straight teeth chewed on the end of his pencil. It was so cute that it should be illegal. Ida sighed and pinched his eyes closed. He needed to get himself together. He hadn't even had a proper conversation with Sero, yet here he was, ogling the black-haired boy without a second thought. Though, a few times, Ida swore he saw Sero staring at him with the same longing gaze. Opening his eyes, Ida took one last lingering glance at Sero before forcing his gaze to the clock hanging at the front of the classroom. 20 minutes left in class. Hopefully everyone would finish in time. Dropping his eyes from the clock, Ida's gaze landed on Aizawa, who was at the front of the class, seemingly asleep. Keyword, seemingly. Sure, the teacher was slouched up against his desk, bloodshot eyes closed, zipped up into his sleeping bag, but if you bothered to look a little closer, you'd see that he was faking it. For one, his mop of greasy black hair was pushed behind his ears, ready to pick up the slightest whisper. His sleeping bag wasn't even zipped all the way up, leaving his capture weapon on full display. A silent threat. Ida shook his head and placed his glasses back on his nose, pushing his finished test into the corner of his desk. Reaching into his bag, He pulled out a book and cracked it open. 3 chapters and 20 minutes later, the bell rang and Aizawa collected all the tests, shuffling out of the room as Cementos took his place. It was a fairly standard class, other than an outburst of snickering from the class when Kaminari fell asleep in the middle of the lesson, head hitting the center of his desk with a loud crack. After Ida had calmed everyone down, the class continued on smoothly. Once the bell had rung and Cementos sent them off with a proper truckload of homework, the class went on their merry way to lunch. Midoriya trotted up to Ida, a cheerful smile on his face. "Ida, how did you think you did on the test?" he asked, pinning his head to the side. "I believe I did well. Our study session did well to prepare me for the more difficult questions." The green-haired boy nodded in agreement, humming cheerily to himself as they walked through the hallway. A few moments of silence passed, and Ida glanced around, noticing the empty spot on Midoriya's left. "Do you happen to know where Uraraka is?" he asked. Frowning, Midoriya glanced around, coming to the realization that she hadn't been following them. "Where do you think she went?" the green-haired boy asked. "Perhaps she stayed behind in class, or is talking with a few of our other classmates." Midoriya nodded, and started excitedly talking about MT Lady's most recent villain takedown, which resulted in a surprising little amount of property damage. The two walked into the cafeteria and after grabbing their lunches, sat down at their usual table. "Oh, there you are, Uraraka," Midoriya chirped, looking up from his notebook. "Did I worry you guys?" "I'm sorry," she said as she sat down, placing her tray on the table carefully. "Don't be, we were just wondering where you had gone." "I was talking with Tsu," she explained, gesturing to her left. Ida looked over, but no one was there. Uraraka, where did she go?" Midoriya asked awkwardly. "I'm right here, Karo." The group's heads whipped over to Ida's left, where the frog girl had managed to sit down unnoticed. "I hope you don't mind if I sit here, Karo," she said, head ped to the side. "We don't mind," Midoriya stuttered out, Ida nodding in agreement. Her lips quirked up into a small smile, which Ida took as a good sign. From what he had seen of her thus far, Tsu didn't seem like the type to display her emotions outwardly. "What do you guys think President Mike is going to have us do in class today?" Uraraka wondered as she started to eat her rice. "Yesterday he stated that we would be working on irregular verb conjugations," Ida said, chopping wildly. "I thought he said something about a group project coming up," Midoriya muttered, scratching the back of his head. "I do not recall him saying anything of the sort." "I don't think he said anything about a project." Midoriya ducked his head and fiddled with his chopsticks. "I must have misheard him." "That's because you're thinking of the wrong teacher, Midoriya. It was Midnight who announced a group project yesterday, Karo." Tsu deadpanned, taking a bite of her sushi. "How did I mix those two up?" the green-haired boy muttered, scrunching his eyebrows together. "Hey, don't get too down on yourself. It's still the beginning of school, and we don't know the teachers all that well." Uraraka reassured him. Ida shuddered slightly. At times, he wished he didn't know those two that well. You really couldn't look Midnight in the eye after nearly getting suffocated by her assets as a toddler. It was something that stuck with you. But they aren't even all that similar. They teach completely different subjects, their teaching styles are crazy different, not to mention how different their appearances are. How could I have mixed them up? Midoriya dissolved into muttering, whipping out his notebook and ripping it open, scribbling down notes. Tsu gave him an odd look, but shrugged it off and turned back to her sushi. "I wonder how many people we can have per group. What will the project even be about? When will it be due?" "Uraraka, there is no need to worry. We'll find out the answers to such questions later on today." "Oh, right." She took a bite of tempura shrimp, chewed, swallowed, and started talking about anything and everything, Tsu tossing in a dry remark every once in a while. "So I was just about to get my long-deserved machi when, she trailed off mid-sentence, jaw-dropping. "Ochako, what's wrong, Karo?" Tsu asked. She just pointed, a confused expression overtaking her face. The other 3 sitting at the table followed her finger, which was pointing towards a loud group of people that were weaving their way through the tables. It was Kirishima, Kaminari, Ashido, Siro, and Bakugo? They were walking across the cafeteria, chatting and laughing loudly. Well, everyone but Bakugo. He was standing in the center of the pack, a deeply set scowl on his face. Kaminari and Ishido were dancing around happily. Kirishima was talking to Bakugo himself, grinning broadly as Sero watched them all, a blissful smile on his face. How are they talking to Kaken without getting yelled at? Midoriya stuttered, eyes widening. He isn't even trying to push them away, Uraraka whispered in awe as the gaggle made their way over to a table. I wonder how they did it, Karo. I know that most of them are pretty good at making friends, but I never would have expected that they make friends with Bakugo of all people. I agree, Karo. It doesn't seem very in character for any of them to befriend such a violent person, Karo. Ida continued to stare at the group as his friends kept talking. Well, he was only staring at Sero, but no one needed to know that. The black-haired boy was sitting beside Kaminari, a small smile on his lips as he looked around the table, skipping from person to person before they darted around the cafeteria, landing on Ida himself. Their eyes met from across the cafeteria, and everything else seemed to melt away. For once in his life, thoughts weren't spinning around in his head, stress and doubt bouncing off the walls of his skull like a Windows screensaver. It was just him and those appealing eyes. What do you think about it, Ida? The class president flinched and turned his gaze back towards his friends. Well, such a group could be a good influence on Bakugo. Their cheerful, laid-back attitudes could do well to help him, he managed, casting a wistful glance over his shoulder, only to see Sero had returned to his friends. Uraraka nodded. That's Ida for you. Always thinking so logically. Ida opened his mouth to respond, but stopped himself, noticing the strange expression on Midoriya's face. His eyebrows were drawn down low, lips pressed into a thin line as he fiddled with his fingers, eyes darting from Bakugo's table to the people sitting at his own. Midoriya, is there something bothering you? The freckled boy snapped back to attention, looking around anxiously as if he'd been caught committing a heinous crime. And no, nothing's bothering me, he stuttered out, avoiding eye contact. Why are you lying, Karo? Asked Sue, finger held to her lips. I'm not. Deku, if there's something wrong, you can tell us. Well, Midoriya let out a long sigh and looked down at his hands. You have a good point, Ida, but I've known Kaken for a really long time, and ever since we were little, I've noticed a pattern. He gulped audibly and looked over at Bakugo's table. Whoever he's around just gets pulled into his orbit. The neighborhood kids who always hung out with him when we were little, they weren't so bad at first, but after being around him for a while, they started to change. They were meaner and crueler and never listened to any adults. Eventually, they were just like him. One of them got mixed up in the wrong sort of crowd and disappeared not too long ago. Midoriya tore his gaze away from the explosive blonde sitting across the cafeteria and returned them to his friends. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't think it's a good idea for you guys to try and get near them. If the pattern repeats itself, I don't want you to get hurt by their anger. It's best to play it safe and steer clear. Ida felt his heart sink down into his stomach as everyone else around the table nodded solemnly, all in collective agreement with Midoriya's statement. Swallowing thickly, he looked down at his food and began to eat quietly, even though he didn't have much of an appetite anymore. Sero couldn't help the feeling that he was being watched. It wasn't much, just a small prickling feeling at the base of his neck as he tried to answer question 14, but he had two little brothers who loved to snoop, and he knew that feeling. But who would be watching him? They were in the middle of a test, for crying out loud. It's not like they'd be trying to cheat off of him, considering he was one of the lowest-ranked students in the class. Glancing up at the clock, Sero could feel his face pale. Only 20 minutes left in class? He was never going to finish in time. Running a hand through his hair, he chewed on the end of his pencil, furrowing his eyebrows as he looked down at the page. But someone was still watching him. Sneakily, Sero's eyes darted over to his left, scanning the faces of everyone in the next row over. Nope. Everyone there was still working on their tests, scribbling down answers frantically, or was already finished. Inconspicuously, Sero leaned back in his chair, pretending to crack his neck as he looked to the right. Everyone was still hunched over their tests with varying stages of worry on their faces. Aoyama still had his usual V-shaped smile on his face, though it did seem a bit strained. Kaminari looked constipated and Ida had his nose shoved into a book, blue eyes scanning the pages slowly. Could Ida have been the one staring at him? It was a definite possibility, but why? Maybe he was concerned that Sero might be trying to cheat, or something. Yeah, that made sense. Or he could have been staring at him longingly. They both seemed to do that to one another. Sero just needed to build up his courage and talk to Ida. Alone, of course, he didn't need any of their friends overhearing that awkward conversation. They'd probably eavesdrop on them anyway. Well, Kaminari and Mina would. Everyone else? Not so much. Shaking out his arms, Sero turned back to his test. He couldn't worry about that right now because he had a test to fail, and he was going to fail it miserably. Much too quickly, the remaining minutes of the class drained away and Sero handed in his test nervously. He totally failed. Placing his head in his hand, the black-haired boy stared ahead lazily as Cementos started his lesson. It was pretty boring for the most part, except for when Kaminari fell asleep, leaving a large red bump on his forehead where it slammed into the desk. That was pretty funny. When the bell rang, Sero stood up and stretched languidly, interlocking his fingers behind his head as he strolled over towards Bakugo's desk. "What are you losers doing? Get away from me," he spat out, glaring at the group gathered around his desk. "We're making sure you come to lunch with us." Mina cried, grabbing onto Bakugo's arm and tugging him out of his seat. Smacking her hand away roughly, Bakugo grit his teeth. "Don't touch me, and I'm not eating lunch with you." "But we need more strategies." "We came up with enough fucking strategies over the weekend. Leave me alone." "But we didn't even begin to cover how to handle team attacks. No one else has made team attacks. Leave me alone." "Not yet anyway. We need to be prepared for anything that Aizawa throw our way." Grumbling, Bakugo stormed past them. "So manly," Kirishima whispered in awe, wiping away a single tear. Kaminari snickered. "I'd say he's more like a 2-year-old throwing a tantrum." Jiro stabbed him with one of her jacks, an unimpressed look on her face. "You're one to talk." "Hey." She rolled her eyes and let out a sigh. "Come on. We better catch up to him before he changes his mind." So the group bolted out of the classroom in the pursuit of Bakugo, who, unfortunately, had made it all the way to the cafeteria in the 30 seconds they had left him alone, probably through the use of elbow jabs and insults. "Bakugo, wait up!" Kaminari cried as he ran past Hagakure and Ojiro, nearly causing them to drop their lunches. The rest of his friends barreled through the two as well, Sero casting them an apologetic look as he followed them. "God, leave me alone, you fucktards." "Gladly," Jiro said, picking up her lunch and starting to walk away. "Where are you going?" Kaminari screeched in disbelief. "Leaving Bakugo alone." But I'm going to go have lunch with Yaoyorozu today. I'm sure you can survive without me." The blonde spluttered for an excuse as they all watched Jiro's retreating form. Kirishima clapped a hand on his back. "Don't be upset, bro. We've got lunch rushes cooking to look forward to." Kaminari didn't reply, just shulched over even more, face morphing into an exaggerated pout. "Keep your head up, Kami. We've got to put it to good use and make team attacks." Mina cried, shoving a tray into his hands. Bakugo snorts. "The only thing Dunceface's head is good for is to be used as a battering ram." "Are you kidding? I would make a horrible battering ram. I'm too skinny." "Yeah. You'd hit the door once and he'd break, so you'd be left with no battering ram and the door still intact." Mina defended. "Not if you hit the door hard enough, dumbass. That doesn't change the fact that you're out of a battering ram." Sero let out a small laugh. "How about we stop using Kaminari as a battering ram and start using Kirishima as one? I would make the best battering ram." Kirishima exclaimed, pounding his fists together. "That's not something to brag about, shitty hair. My hair isn't that different than yours. You're just jealous," Mina teased as they all exited the line, glancing around for a table to sit at. "Why the F would I be jealous of anyone? I'm fucking amazing." "Because you wouldn't make a very good battering ram, that's why," Kaminari butted in, smirking. "I would make a great battering ram." "Not. You're too tiny. I'm not tiny, Raccoon Eyes. Bakugo, would you let us pick you up and slam you into a door until the door broke? Sero asked as they sat down. No. Then you'd make a pretty bad battering ram. I didn't ask for your opinion, soy sauce. What about me? Would I make a good battering ram? Mina asked. Of course you would. You have horns. Kaminari exclaimed. They're tiny little beach butt horns. Hey! Sero smiled softly, looking around at all of the smiling faces around him. Eyes darting around the cafeteria, Sero noticed a pair of eyes looking his way. An appealing pair of blue eyes that were staring at him through a pair of rectangular glasses. Sero sighed as he and Ida locked eyes from across the room, everything else melting away into an unimportant puddle of goop. Those appealing eyes were the only things that mattered right now. But had his stomach always been a butterfly conservatory? But then Ida flinched and turned away, looking over at Uraraka and saying something. Soy sauce, what the F are you looking at? Sero snapped back to attention. Huh? Why the F were you looking at, Deku? Bakugo demanded, smacking the black-haired boy on the back of the head. I was just… Yo, Baku bro, I've been meaning to ask, but what's your deal with Midoriya? Kirishima asked, putting his chopsticks down. What a savior. Bakugo grit his teeth and walloped the sharp-toothed boy on the head. He's a useless piece of shit. He isn't that bad. Shut your face, Raccoon Eyes. He's a useless bastard that doesn't deserve to be here. He calls you Kakin, right? What did you do to get such a cute nickname? I don't have to tell you shitheads anything. And don't call me that. Come on, why won't you tell us? Because I don't have to. He's a useless piece of shit, and so are the people dumb enough to be his friends. Hey, not all of them are bad. Sero defended. Ida got MVP during his match in the Heroes vs. Villains practice, which you were in. Bakugo stared the black-haired boy down, left eye twitching violently. Man, he really was a dumbass. Quick as a viper, Bakugo grabbed Sero's wrist and pulled him close. If you ever say something that completely idiotic again, I will kick you in the nuts so hard that each and every one of your vertebrae will pop out of your mouth like a PZ dispenser. Do you understand? He hissed into Sero's ear. The black-haired boy nodded meekly as Bakugo pulled away and sat back down, narrowed eyes leering at everyone sitting at the table. Listen up, a-holes. I've changed the rules. What rules? Kirishima asked. About this whole teamwork thing. It's just one more thing you shitheads have to do, and if you can't do it then we might as well end this whole agreement now. We can totally do it. Kaminari exclaimed, Mina nodding along in agreement behind him. Bakugo jutted his chin towards Ida's table, a sinister glint in his eye. If you want to keep this alliance going, you are all going to stay away from Deku and his friends. If one of you even FANG thinks about talking to them, I'll kill you. I won't be associated with Deku, even if it's through you dumbass. What? You got it, boss. Kaminari and Mina chimed. What? Kirishima nodded somewhat reluctantly. Sure thing, bro. What? They were just going to completely ignore 3 of their classmates because Bakugo said so? Mina, seeing the shocked expression on his face, leaned in close. Hey, don't worry too much. We'll just play his good side for a little longer, and once he's hooked, we'll bend the rules a little. He'll like having friends so much, he just won't be able to get rid of us. Sero gulped. Doesn't that seem a little bit wrong? Just ignoring people because Bakugo says so? Did you not hear what I just said? We're going to play his good side so we won't have to. I just don't think we should let him dictate who we can talk to, that's all. Come on. It's only for a little bit. We're his only friends. We've got to try our best to make him a better person. Is that really our job though? He gave us a chance, which he hasn't done for anyone else. That doesn't mean we owe him anything. Yeah, that's true, but you have to realize that no one else is willing to give him one. Since we're his friends, we've at least got to try. Sero shifted in his seat uncomfortably. He supposed Mina had a point, but that wasn't going to make staying away from Ida any easier. So, when are you going to end up expelling the new students? Midnight cooed as she looked down at her coworker. When they give me a reason to, Aizawa grunted, not bothering to look up from the papers he was grading. And they haven't yet? Not completely. She snorted. That's a surprise. They're a handful. That's putting it lightly, Nimuri. Oh, I know. She tapped a manicured nail on her chin thoughtfully. Wonder how much trouble they'll cause us by the end of the year. Aizawa grumbled. Too much. Now leave me alone. I'm getting a nap in before lunch ends. Midnight scoffed. Why am I not surprised? Zashi made a big mistake when he gave you that stupid sleeping bag. Now you just sleep everywhere and avoid your problems. I did that before the sleeping bag. Touché. Get the F out of here with those French words. I don't speak croissant. Rude. I'm going to sleep. Don't you have tests to grade? I'm going to sleep. She sighed. I'm not mad, just disappointed. I've come to terms with the fact that no one will ever hold me or my actions in high regard, so your words mean nothing. Midnight sighed again and shook her head as the eraser hero zipped himself into his sleeping bag and crawled underneath his desk, dead to the world. Shaking her head, the R-rated hero walked over to the small kitchenette, where Snipe and 13 were debating possibilities on why Midoriya and Bakugo hated one another so much. Pouring herself a cup of tea and raising an eyebrow at the wild theories, Midnight returned to her desk. She sat down and placed the mug on her desk and flipped open her lesson plans for the day. The partner project. The first group project in any class with their UA classmates. So much power lay in her perfectly manicured hands. Smirking deviously, Midnight picked up a pen and flipped the page over to the class roster. Now, which of her students would look cute together? Who had the best chemistry? Which pairings would cause the most drama? With one mere decision, she had the power to start romances that would last a lifetime. Chiding herself silently, Midnight scanned the faces of the hero hopefuls. Class 1A. Obviously, she needed to pair off the most difficult first. Bakugo had been yelling at Kaminari a whole lot less, and he would force Kaminari to do part of the work, so those two would pair together nicely. No real chemistry, but Bakugo didn't really have chemistry with anyone yet. This project could do well to strengthen their friendship. If Bakugo even knew what that word meant, Mineta would definitely not be going with one of the girls. They didn't deserve that. Mineta needed to be with a respectful boy who would put a stop to any attempted harassment. Now that the biggest pains were taken care of, it was time for the fun part. Aoyama, an overdramatic, sparkly young man. So of course he would be paired up with the overdramatic, dark young man, Tokoyami. They were bound to color coordinate and get it done on time, though they were going to argue about putting glitter on the project. Midoriya and Uraraka were an obvious choice. Already so much tension. So much room for friendship drama. Koda? Soft-spoken, docile Koda? Ashido, obviously. Just to push the boy out of his comfort zone a little. He would help keep her on track during the project too. But Jiro? Obviously Hagakure. Jiro and Todoroki's deadpan expressions just looked too hilarious not to pair them up. Todoroki was definitely a little bit emo, and Jiro simply needed to push him in the right direction of too much eyeliner and My Chemical Romance. Yaoyorozu and Sato both had food consumption quirks and didn't fit with anyone else particularly well, so they were together. Ajui's calm, level-headed nature would contrast most interestingly with Kirishima's boisterous personality. She would keep him on track, and he would guarantee she didn't overwork herself. And that left Oh yes. Liking her lips, Midnight stared down at the last two unmarked students. Little Tenya and Siro. This was going to be so much fun. Ever since the start of school, her favorite and only nephew had been making goo-goo eyes at Siro every chance he got. Somehow, no one seemed to notice this except for her. Their classmates seemed far too preoccupied with homework, friendship, and competing with one another to care, and Midnight's fellow teachers were getting back into the flow of balancing 2 or more jobs and dealing with raucous students. It's like she was the only one in the entire school who appreciated a good teenage romance nowadays. Thankfully, the R-rated hero had friends outside of UA. Old sidekicks, some neighbors, a few SRS, but most importantly, Turbo Hero Ingenium. They hadn't been particularly close during their school days, but after graduation they had grown much closer, mostly because of the fact that Midnight had been hired as Tenya's babysitter for some odd reason. But the important thing to take away from that wasn't Tenya's first word, which was still hilarious, even after 15 years. It was that Tensei kept her updated on just about everything that happened with her new nephew. This included how just a few days ago, Tenya revealed he had a crush on someone. Apparently, no matter how much he pestered his little brother, Tensei couldn't get a name. So Tensei immediately called Midnight, explained, and asked for her help. It didn't take long to figure out who Tenya's mystery crush was, considering they were both kind of obvious, especially to a love expert like her. So as the two danced around one another, Midnight designed a brand new project solely for the purpose of getting them together. Sure, it was a lot of work, but it would so be worth it when they started dating. Which would definitely happen because they liked each other and just needed a shove in the right direction. And all of this wasn't to mention the potential drama. Sero was friends with Kaminari, Kirishima, Ishido, and most importantly, Bakugo, while Tenya was friends with Uraraka, Azui, and Midoriya. Midoriya idolized Bakugo to the point of godhood, and Bakugo hated Midoriya with every fiber of his being. So obviously, Tenya and Sero dating would cause some drama. But that's what would make things interesting. All this talk of young love really got her going. Shuddering, Midnight took a long sip of tea as she marked them down as the last pair. Meddling in love lives could make you quite parched. After a bit more work and another cup of tea, lunch was about to come to a close, so Midnight picked up her things and headed for Class 1A. It was time to put her plan into action. Sashaying into the room, the R-rated silenced the students with a crack of her WHP. "Good afternoon, Midnight," they chorused, most of them anyway. "Good afternoon to you too, class. As you should know, today you'll be starting a partner project," she announced with a flip of her hair. Excited whispers spread across the room as Midnight's lips quirked up into a smirk. Might as well let them get their hopes up before crushing them like a pesky bug underneath her stiletto heel. "Now, before you all get too excited, I want you to know that I've picked out your partners for you." Loud groans of disappointment cut through the classroom as Ishido draped herself over her desk and Bakugo growled, balling his hands into fists. Pulling out her notes, Midnight looked out at the defeated faces of her class. The groups are Aoyama and Tokoyami, Ishido and Koda, Azui and Kirishima, Ida and Sero, Uraraka and Midoriya, Ojiro and Hagakure, Kaminari and Bakugo, Sato and Yaoyorozu, Shoji and Mineta, and finally, Jiro and Todoroki. There were a few groans and a small explosion from Bakugo's general area. "Before you ask, no, you can't change partners, and this will be due by the end of the week. Everything else you need to know can be found here with the guidelines sheet." Pulling out said sheet, Midnight waved it at her students. "Now, get with your partners, grab one of these," she pointed to the papers in her hand. "You can stay in here or go to the library to work." When no one moved, Midnight cracked her WHP once more. "Get a move on. Did you not hear me when I said it's due by this Friday?" The students scrambled out of their seats and over to their assigned partners, though Bakugo had grabbed Sero by the back of the blazer and said something before shoving him away. They grouped up into their pairs and shuffled up to the teacher's desk to grab their papers. Midnight handed them out casually, but she was focused on Tenya and Sero, who were standing next to one another awkwardly, pointedly avoiding eye contact. The R-rated hero grit her teeth as she handed Jiro and Todoroki their work. "Come on. You both like one another. Stop being oblivious and awkward." Once the two made it to her, Midnight handed off the papers to Tenya, winking suggestively. His shoulders tensed up as his eyes darted over to Sero's nervous face, before thanking Midnight stiffly and walking away. Sero swallowed thickly and squeezed his eyes shut. Midnight listed off the groups casually. Of course, right after Bakugo made the rule about staying away from Midoriya and his friends, he got paired up with Ida. Just his luck. Opening his eyes, Sero glanced around the room at his friends. Bakugo was gritting his teeth and glaring at their teacher, small explosions igniting themselves in his palms. Kaminari, on the other hand, was smirking like the smug BSE he was, somehow not fearing for his life considering that Bakugo was his partner. Jiro had a neutral expression on her face, though she seemed somewhat relieved. probably because she hadn't been paired up with Kaminari. Mina was shimmying excitedly in her seat, looking ready to start breakdancing on her desk at the drop of a hat. Or was it the drop of a pin? Whatever, metaphors were hard. Kirishima was grinning from ear to ear, no surprise there as he looked over at Tsu, giving her an enthusiastic thumbs up, which she returned, albeit much more calmly. Shiro's eyes darted from Tsu over to Ida. His face was neutral, but his shoulders were a bit tenser than usual as he looked forward at their teacher. And Shiro completely forgot to mention that his first real conversation with the class president would be about some random history project. Great. Midnight cracked her WHP again and yelled about the due date, causing everyone to get out of their seats, desperately searching for their partners. Well, everyone but Bakugo, who stormed over to Shiro's desk and pulled him out of his chair by the scruff of the neck. Listen up, tape face, 'cause I'm only saying this once. It isn't your fault that the slot paired you up with glasses, but you're on thin FING ice. If you want to keep the deal going with me and the gaggle of losers, you're only going to talk to Glasses about the project and make his life a living hell. Bakugo squeezed the back of Shiro's neck harder. Got it? Got it. Shiro squeaked out. Bakugo shot him one last glare before releasing Shiro and shoving him back down into his chair, yelling at Kaminari to stop goofing off and to get the F over here, you piece of shit. Standing back up, Shiro glanced around and joined Ida at the back of the line leading up to Midnight's desk. He offered the blue-haired boy a small smile before looking away and just standing there awkwardly, inching forward towards Midnight's desk. This was going to be a long project. Ida should have known better. At first it seemed like an unlucky coincidence, but with the lilt in Midnight's voice as she announced the pairs, that was difficult to believe. It was even more difficult to believe when he noticed her sky-blue eyes were trained on the two of them, mischief twinkling in them. What really sealed the deal, though, was the sly wink she gave him when handing off the guidelines worksheet. It was definitely a setup, and Ida really should have known better. Ever since he was a baby, he knew that Midnight was perceptive and observant, especially when it came to other people. So of course she noticed when her favorite nephew, who was always so academically focused, would look over at another student and just stare for a while, tuning out a little bit of the lesson before snapping back to attention and scribbling down some notes. Tensei had probably talked to her too, asking her to keep a lookout for his little brother's mystery crush. So really, when she announced this project, Ida should have known that he and Shiro were going to get paired up, if only to satisfy Midnight's need to set up a couple. That didn't make it any less awkward, though. After a very short, very awkward conversation about if they should go to the library or not, Ida felt like digging his own grave. He couldn't do this. Shiro was right there, which normally would have been amazing, but he wasn't himself. His hands were completely still, he wasn't smiling, and his posture was much more reminiscent of Ida's own than his usual one. Oh dear. Swallowing loudly, Ida distracted himself by chastising Ashido for running in the halls, giving Koda a pitiful glance as he did so. Once the group had reached the library and Ida reminded everyone to be respectful, they walked inside and went their separate ways. Mere seconds after they had all entered the library, there was a loud scream from the other side of the room, and though he didn't want to jump to conclusions, Ida was fairly sure that it was Ashido. Shaking his head, he and Shiro walked over to a table in a secluded corner of the library, out of earshot and view of their classmates. Ida cleared his throat for the umpteenth time, eyes darting up to look at Shiro, who was looking nervously, clicking his pen and staring at the space above Ida's head. I do believe that we should decide which hero to do our project on, he said in a low whisper, clearing his throat again. Huh. Shiro snapped to attention, eyes darting around nervously. Oh yeah, that sounds good. They stared at one another awkwardly for a few moments before Ida looked down at the paper, pushing his glasses up. It says here that we must agree on a hero to analyze, and write an overview of their special attacks, hero costume, history, affiliated heroes, etc. It does say that. Is there anyone in particular you have in mind? Not really. You? No. The two fell into silence again, Shiro tugging at a strand of hair as Ida fiddled with a pen, both pointedly avoiding eye contact. Muffled sounds of Midoriya and Uraraka fangirling could be heard, along with the librarian reprimanding them harshly. How about we pick a region? Sero suggested, peering down at the paper. Pardon? Pick a region to narrow it down a little, and pick a hero from there. Or we would pick a prefecture. It doesn't really matter. Both will save us a little bit of research. That's an excellent idea. Do you have a specific region in mind? How about Kyushu? Sero suggested, playing with his fingers. It's a good start. You could cut the tension with a knife. Now that we've narrowed down our options, we should start doing some research on heroes in that area, Ida said, adjusting his glasses. Sero let out a quick breath. I know it's been like 2 minutes, but I can't do this anymore. We need to address the elephant in the room, or something. I think that's a metaphor. Specifically, it's a metaphorical idiom, and I agree that we should address whatever is going on here. Oh yeah, it was killing me. Would you like to go first? Yeah. Sero drew in a long breath and avoided eye contact. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that you already know this because you're like super observant and I'm not very subtle, but I just want to make it clear that I like you. Like you. And you, Ida said breathlessly. Their eyes met and both smiled softly, Sero resisting the urge to jump out of his chair and perform a small victory dance. But he didn't, because that would be equal parts embarrassing and awkward for both parties. So, we both like each other and we know we like each other. Do I have that right? The black-haired boy asked, still grinning like a doofus. Yes. Ida laughed a little at that. Could it really be this simple? This easy? No overdramatic confessions or love triangles. Just a small admittance of the truth in the back corner of the library? Was that all? So are we going to try dating or something? God, just the thought of dating sent Ida's heart spiraling down into his stomach. In a good way, if that was possible. I would like that, he mumbled, flushing slightly. Ida didn't know how it was possible, but Sero's face stretched into an even wider grin, shimmying in his seat a little. But then his smile dropped and his shoulders sagged, realization setting in. I would too, but there's something we need to work out first. Because I'm pretty sure everyone in the school knows Midoriya and Bakugo hate each other, and Bakugo kinda sorta told me and my friends that we shouldn't even talk to you guys. He was upset that Sue and Kiri were paired up, but since she isn't that close to you guys, he didn't totally explode. Oh, well that's not good. I know, right? Sero laughed nervously. He got super upset when he found out we were partners, fumed a bit about midnight pairing us up, and told me to only talk about the project, and to make it as hard on you as I could. Obviously I'm not listening. Ida frowned, eyebrows drawing together. That doesn't seem very healthy, him telling you what to do like that. Yup. Sero shook his head. Normally I'd just up and leave, but the squad being around him has already changed him so much and, well, I don't want to give them up. It's either stay with Bakugo or leave and lose them too. I'm not giving them up. Even if I have to jump through some hoops to stay. Midoriya has told me something similar, albeit he didn't threaten us. What did he say? He warned us to stay away from Bakugo and his friends. Told us how Bakugo, for lack of a better term, corrupted his old friends and didn't want us talking with you, just in case he got to you too. Oh. The two sat in silence for a while, Sero scratching the back of his head while Ida opted to straighten the papers in front of him. So, what are we going to do now? Sero asked, drumming his fingers on the table absent-mindedly. I'm not sure. It seems we have to choose our friends or one another. The two made eye contact across the table, somewhat defeated looks in their eyes. Sero was the first to look away, casting his gaze down at his hands. Can I think about this for a little while? I think it would do well for both of us to reflect before coming to a decision, Ida agreed. Until then, we should continue to work on the project. That sounds like a good idea, Sero agreed with a half-hearted smile. After their strange little intermission, Sero found it the tiniest bit easier to concentrate on the project. The uncomfortable tension was gone for the most part, which was amazing. He didn't know if he could take one more minute of him and Ida awkwardly avoiding eye contact. The only reason he still found it difficult to concentrate was because Ida's cheekbones were ridiculously distracting. That wasn't fair to say. Everything about Ida was distracting. His hair, his eyes, his glasses, his personality, his voice, his cheekbones, everything. Sero, does it say what the inspiration for Medusa's hero costume is in that article? Ida's deep voice snapped Sero out of his thoughts. He dropped his eyes from those flawless cheekbones onto the article he was supposed to be reading. It, says here that it's based off of something called a chitin? Ida nodded and jotted down the note. What is a chitin anyway? Sero asked, obviously because he was interested, not just because he wanted to hear Ida's silky smooth voice. It was an article of clothing commonly worn by the ancient Greeks, similar to a tunic in a way. It makes quite a lot of sense, considering her hero name, which comes from Greek mythology. Who would name their kid Medusa? You have to keep in mind that it was a very different time back then, and that Medusa was a monster that stemmed from a myth. She was once an appealing maiden who got transformed into a hideous beast by Athena, a goddess in Greek mythology, for doing unsavory things. In her temple, and outside of the myth, a carving of Medusa's face was often placed on Athena's temples. It was a reminder of sorts. An evil to ward off evil. Okay, that makes sense, Sero said, not understanding anything he said. But he didn't need to understand what Ida was saying, because he could see how much it meant to the blue-haired boy just by looking at him. His chest was puffed out, hands chopping the air smoothly, the corners of his eyes crinkled upward and his zigzaggy eyebrows were surprisingly relaxed. The sparkle in his eye was something Sero rarely saw. Pure, unadulterated fascination and love. It was the same look Midoriya got when he was asked about one of his favorite heroes, or when Mina got to dance. It was refreshing, to be honest. Seeing the class president so relaxed, so happy, so free, Sero couldn't describe it properly, but it was amazing. Ida was amazing. Speaking of which, Ida finished talking and let the soft smile drop from his face as he pushed a lock of hair out of his face. Are there any other notes on her hero costume? He asked, picking up a pen, seemingly unaffected by the fact that Sero had been staring at him like he was the most appealing thing in the world. Dark eyes dropped back down to the article, skimming over the ridiculous amount of words dedicated to a single costume. The entire thing is built to retain heat, which makes sense with the whole cold-blooded thing. Sero skipped down the page a little. And the scale pattern is based on bush vipers. That's cool. Bush vipers? Yeah, they're super cool. Their scales are kinda spiky and look like leaves if you squint and turn your head a little. The different subspecies live all over Africa, which makes it a little weird that a hero like Medusa, who's apparently based on Greek mythology, would use them in her design, because Greece and Africa have a whole Mediterranean Sea between them. The least I think so. I'm not that good at geography. Sir, paused to take a breath, still looking down at the article. Ooh, I can't forget that they're arboreal, which is just a fancy way of saying that they live in trees, but you probably knew that because you're super smart and really pretty, and that's a dangerous combo that I've completely fallen for. Anyway, their venom is hemotoxic, so it causes problems with blood clotting and swelling and all that fun stuff. Sero cut himself off, the realization suddenly dawning on him that he was rambling worse than Midoriya was, about a dumb snake, to his crush. He felt his face heat up as he sent a silent prayer to whatever god was up there, to please strike him dead for being such a gay disaster. Slowly, Onyx's eyes raised their way up towards Ida, who had his head propped up on one hand, a dopey smile on his face as he gazed at Sero adoringly through thick lashes. Their eyes met, and Sero watched as the light pink dusting Ida's cheekbones turned into a violent cherry red that rivaled the color of Kirishima's hair. Ida jerked his gaze down towards his notes and he scribbled down the information. When he looked back up, his cheeks were considerably less red, though they were still heavily blushed. Sero took a mental picture of that face. It was one of the most adorable things he'd ever seen in his life. Ida's eyes darted up towards the clock hanging on a nearby wall, and his expression shifted, eyebrows drawing together, lips pressing together, and his eyes darting back over to the boy sitting across from him. I do believe our time is coming to a close. We should gather the rest of our classmates and return to class before the bell rings, Ida said, hands already moving to clean up the mess they had made at the table. Sero let his bottom lip jut out in a pout. They had to leave already? But he hadn't even found out Iida's favorite color. But he wasn't going to be useless just because he was mopey. His grandmother would whoop his behind with her finest pair of sandals if she ever found out. So he helped Iida pick up their papers, which the class president tucked neatly into his bag, alongside his fancy pens that looked like they would be very fun to play with. Standing up, Sero cringed at the amount of pops and creaks his joints emitted. "God, I sound like a glow stick," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Popping his neck, he looked over at Iida, who was staring at him with a mixture of confusion and fear. "Pardon?" He said that out loud, didn't he? A glow stick? I am aware of what a glow stick is, I just don't quite comprehend how a person can sound like one. Like when you first get the glow stick and you have to break it to make it glow. It makes all those weird popping noises. A look of understanding passed over Iida's face. "Oh, I see. Believe it or not, there is a method to my madness." Sero glanced around. "Now, as much as I don't want to, I think we should go grab everyone else. I don't want to be late." "You don't want to? Why not?" "I wanted to talk to you for a little longer." "Your voice sounds nice," Sero said without thinking. He did that a lot. Well, Iida cleared his throat and fidgeted with the strap of his bag. "I'm glad you think so." They shared bashful smiles and Sero swore his heart was going to beat straight out of his chest. After a few seconds though, Iida insisted that they get moving and find their classmates. Sero knew he was right, but that didn't make him feel any better. They found Tokoyami and Aoyama first, who were getting along shockingly well, considering their contrasting color palettes. Ojiro and Hagakure were already packed up, though for some strange reason the invisible girl was giggling uncontrollably. She did that a lot though, so no real need to be concerned. Jiro and Todoroki were as deadpan as ever, while Midoriya and Uraraka seemed even more excited than they usually were, though there was an air of awkwardness around them. Sero didn't need fancy eye-tingly powers to know something was going on between them, even if they didn't know it. Once the two saw Iida, the two perked up immediately, Uraraka skipping over cheerily and dragging him away by the arm, Midoriya following her timidly. The blue-haired boy cast an apologetic look back towards Sero, who offered up a grin and a slight wave goodbye. Everyone made it back to class on time, and as Midnight tossed her hair over her shoulder and bid the class farewell, Sero swore he saw her wink at Iida. "Sero, I need to learn your secrets," Kaminari said, running up to the black-haired boy and shaking his shoulders roughly. Sero could feel himself pale. Did Kaminari know? He knew that he and Iida weren't the most subtle in their forlorn gazes, but Kaminari wouldn't notice that. Would he? "Dude, are you even listening to me?" the aforementioned blonde asked, waving a hand around wildly to try and get his attention. "I don't think he is," Mina piped up, snapping her fingers in front of his nose. "Sorry man," Sero said, trying his best to regain his composure and easygoing attitude despite the internal screaming. "What do you need?" "You need to tell me your secrets." What's that supposed to mean? How was working with Iida? Was he nice? What did you talk about? Mina was bouncing on the ball of her feet excitedly. "Yeah. You gotta tell us." "'Cause we gotta know if he's worth making friends with." "You make it sound like we're making a business deal, Cammy." "I mean, we might be. This is Iida we're talking about." "Don't say that. We don't know what he's like." "I mean, he's the class president and he's got like the whole Ingenium thing going on, so I think I'm right." "But like, he isn't just the class president. Kinda like how your parents aren't just your parents." "Why are we talking about parents?" a chipper voice asked. "Ooh, Kiri, you have amazing timing." Mina scampered over to him and shook his shoulders. "You have to help us interrogate Sero." "But interrogating your friends isn't manly," Kirishima protested. "We're doing it for a just cause though." Kaminari explained. "We need him to tell us what Iida's like." Kirishima tapped his chin thoughtfully. "That is a pretty good reason. But what do you guys want to know about him in the first place?" "If he's a cool dude," Mina chirped. "Because right now, to us, he's just kinda the class president and the class dad, and we want to know what else he's like." Kaminari added on, grinning cheekily. "Couldn't you guys just find out for yourselves?" Kirishima suggested. fiddling with one of his hair spikes. I mean, yeah, but he's just so intimidating, Kaminari said. In a good way though. Like he's super passionate about stuff. Mina nodded in agreement with her own statement. So if you guys know this, why don't you just go and talk to him? Kirishima asked. Well, Mina and Kaminari exchanged nervous glances. They obviously hadn't thought of logic coming into play. We just want to know what it was like working with him, Mina clarified. Did he do all the work? What did you talk about? What is his quiet voice like? Sero chuckled, a warm feeling spreading in his chest. Maybe he shouldn't have been so worried about them finding out. We just talked about the project, and it's just like his normal voice, I guess? What the hell are you idiots talking about? A new voice growled, as said as ever. Nothing important, Sero lied smoothly. Yeah. Nothing, Kaminari agreed, nodding his head clunkily. Bakugo's eyes narrowed. You're lying. You were talking about glasses. How is that lying? I said we weren't talking about anything important. We weren't, Sero said, ignoring the twinge in his gut as he spoke. He was just lying to keep his secret safe. Bakugo frowned. Why were you talking about him in the first place? We were just wondering what happened. Kaminari whined. We already talked about everyone else's partners and we were just on Sero's. Mina explained. You missed the part where I told everyone how I got kicked out of the library. Bakugo rolled his eyes. Why are you even talking about him though? Glasses is one of Deku's sheet-faced friends. That's all that matters. He's not that bad, Sero defended, avoiding eye contact. Are you kidding? He's got a stick shoved so far up his but you can see it when he talks, which is all the effing time by the way. Sero glanced over at Kaminari, who had suddenly clammed up. Sero looked to the left. Mina was avoiding eye contact. He looked past her and over to Kirishima, who was re-spiking his hair even though it was perfectly spiky. Looks like he was all alone. You'll shut your face if you know what's good for you, soy sauce. Dude, I'm just saying. Once you get to know him, you talk to him for an hour tops. Shut up. You don't have to be so harsh. Didn't I tell you to shut up? Bakugo growled. Dude, drop it. Us a little time to warm up to Bakugo, and then we can help make him a better person, Kaminari whispered. Sero shook his head and sighed. I'm just saying. You've got it wrong, dude. Shut the F up, soy sauce. Hanta stood at the stoop of his house, cringing slightly at the loud shrieking coming from within the confines of its walls. Might as well bite the bullet and get this over with. That is what biting the bullet meant, right? Analogies were hard. Shaking his head, the second-born Sero unlocked the front door and stepped into the chaos. Haruka and Reizo were in the living room, throwing insults and swears into the air as they bickered loudly. Just what he needed. Yukari and Kaichi were nowhere to be seen, though Hanta knew that they were here. They were probably hiding in a futile attempt to stay out of the argument. Hanta needed to put a stop to this fight before another full-scale civil war erupted in the Sero household. The last time that had happened, Mama grounded them all for a month straight and made them scrub the hardwood until they could see all your mistakes reflected in the floorboards. All in all, not a very good time. Dumping his bag by the door and taking off his shoes, Hanta squared his shoulders and tried his best to channel all of his big brother authority. There wasn't much, but he needed all the help he could get. Drawing in a deep breath, he entered the room and started to survey the scene. They were standing in the middle of the room, face to face because Reizo was ridiculously tall for a 7-year-old. It ran in the family. Haruka was looking uncharacteristically ruffled as she gestured wildly, octagonal glasses slipping down her nose, while Reizo looked uncharacteristically mad as he stomped loudly and screamed back at her. Releasing a breath, Hanta inserted himself into the argument and shoved the two apart. What is going on here? He asked in what he hoped was a calm and commanding tone. What does it look like? Haruka laughed, short and husky. We're fighting, dipshit. Hanta smacked her on the arm lightly, an annoyed expression on his face. Don't swear, Haru. You do it all the time. No, I don't. Yeah, you do. Reizo piped up. Haruka gave her older brother a smug smirk as she placed a hand on her hip and raised a brow. Your move, her expression screamed. Good news is that they had a common enemy and weren't fighting anymore. Bad news is that all of their pent-up anger would soon be unleashed on Hanta. What were you two fighting about? He asked, looking between his siblings. Haruka's smug look soured as her dark eyes slid over to look at Reizo. Someone decided that it would be a good idea to go into my room and completely destroy it, she spat, pushing her glasses up. Reizo scowled. I was just looking for my soccer shoes. Why would your soccer shoes be in my room? Because you took them. Why would I take your soccer shoes? Why would I care about your dumb shoes? Because you kept yelling at me to put them away, he exclaimed. So you picked them up and hid them to teach you a lesson. That's something Hanta would do, not me. I don't care enough to take your stupid shoes. That's exactly what you would say if you took my shoes. You're deflecting the blame. Give me one good reason why I would take the shoes. I just gave you one. To teach me a lesson. I've learned my lesson, now give me my shoes back. I didn't them. Liar. I didn't take them. Liar. The two lunged at one another, and Hanta shot out 2 strips of tape, pinning their arms to their sides. Before they could topple forwards and knock heads, Hanta pulled back the tape and caught a sibling in each hand. You guys are just running around in circles? No, we're not. We're standing still. I really don't need your sass right now, Haruka, Hanta said, squinting his eyes at her. She just rolled her eyes and tried her best to make a crude gesture with her hands pinned next to her waist. Rai, come on. I'll help you look for your shoes. Haru, go calm down and fix your room. I don't need to calm down, she screamed, flailing around, still wrapped up in tape. Yes, you do, Hanta deadpanned, retracting his tape and freeing her. Don't tell me what to do, she spat. Retracting his tape and freeing his siblings, Hanta followed Reizo down the hallway, head swerving from side to side as he searched for a pair of neon green shoes. Hanta rubbed his eyes and squinted down at the math homework in front of him. Why did fractions have to hate him so much? Shoveling rice into his mouth with his free hand, he glanced over at his phone, which was deliberately sitting halfway across the room so he wouldn't pick it up halfway through his dissection of the parts of plant cells and scroll through memes until he passed out. With these improper fractions mocking him though, those memes were awfully tempting. Shaking his head, Hanta looked back down at the page, turning his attention back to those devious fractions and forcing all of his brain power into understanding them. But they still weren't making sense, no matter how hard he stared at them. Maybe he could just Google some videos how to understand fractions and not to be dumb. Ida and Bakugo were both crazy smart. Maybe he could get one of them to tutor him. But he would have to pick one or the other, because of course he would have to choose. Why did he have to pick between his friends and Ida? Well, that was because they didn't get along. They could get along if they tried to get to know one another. There was no doubt in Hanta's mind about that, but that wasn't happening anytime soon. How was he supposed to pick between them? Well, he didn't know that yet, actually. There were pros and cons of both. There wasn't a good answer, and if there was one, he hadn't found it yet. And on top of all that, he had to deal with these dumb, stupid fractions. God, high school SeriIida. Glancing down at the math problem he was stumbling his way through, he could feel his willpower crumbling. Standing up, Hanta crossed the room and picked up his phone. He needed to talk to someone about all this. Not the math, but his problems. Not all of his problems, obviously, there were way too many of those to talk about in one night, just his friends/crush problems. None of his friends, obviously, and his mama wasn't available either, because she would snoop a bit too much for his tastes. All of his siblings were kids that couldn't understand stuff like this, biologically. Their brains weren't advanced enough for this yet. Well, that isn't true. There was one person that he could talk to. So he opened the phone app and called his older sister. She was 7 hours behind them, so she could be at work. Hopefully she wasn't. Please pick up, please pick up, please pick. Hanta? Why were you calling me? Isn't it like 10 p.m. over there? He smiled cheekily. Does it matter what time it is, Kurumi? Shouldn't the only thing that matters be that you're talking to me? She snorted. Whatever you say, little dude. Now, why are you calling? Straight to the point, huh? I'm on my lunch break right now, so I'm on a timer. I'm assuming that you didn't call for casual conversation. There is something actually. Fire away, little dude. I have 20 minutes, and that's it. Okay, so, it's kinda complicated, but I'll try my best to explain. Basically what's happening is that I like this person and they like me, but they're in a different friend group than mine, the rival friend group of mine actually, and that's what makes it complicated because my friends don't like them in their friend group, and their friend group don't like me in my friend group, but we like each other, and we know that, but our friends don't know that, so it's like, we have to choose between each other and our friends and I don't know what to do about it. Kirumi was silent on the other line for longer than Hanta thought was necessary. That is quite the pickle you've gotten yourself into. She chuckled, and was so smiling mischievously. Yeah, I know. That's why I called you. And that was a good choice. So what's your advice? Well, tell me what you think you should do. I don't know what I should do. That's why I'm asking you. Your friends make you happy, right? Yeah. And this crush of yours makes you happy too, right? Hanta frowned and huffed vexingly. That's my problem here. I don't know how to pick. How do each of them make you happy? Kaminari tells stupid jokes, Kirishima's always so positive, Mina's always jumping around, Bakugo's a little rough around the edges but he's crazy determined, and Jiro has good taste in music and a super chill attitude. Aha. But Iida just makes me happy in a different way. The way he talks, his smile, his dedication to being a hero, the fact that he can make anything sound interesting, how much he cares about his friends. Okay, yeah, I get it. This guy is great. Yeah, he is. Well, obviously they all mean a lot to you. We've been over that. Now can I please get some advice? I'm getting to that. Can you get to it faster? Hanta, you should never compromise when it comes to your happiness, especially if you can avoid it. But I have to. I have to pick. Do you? We've been over this. Like I literally just said, Hanta, you shouldn't compromise when it comes to your happiness. Not when there's another option. But there isn't another option, Kirumi. You sure? Because I'm pretty sure secret dating is a thing, Hanta. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. I figured as much. Thanks for the advice, Kirumi. It wasn't so much advice as it was reminding you that there's almost always a third option. Now, I'd love to hear more about your boy troubles, but I need to finish my sandwich and get back to work. Go make money. I will. Love you. Love you too, Hanta. Tell everyone I said hi, that I love them. Can do. Oh, and, Kirumi, do you know when you're coming back home? Soon. You say that all the time. I mean it this time, I promise. Hanta let out an unimpressed grunt. Oh, don't give me that. I've taken vacation time already. Really? And bought a plane ticket like the responsible adult I am. You're a lot of things, but a responsible adult is one of them. You're not wrong, Kirumi admitted. I've really got to go now, though. Good luck with this Iida kid. Thanks. See you in a few weeks. Yup. Love ya. Love you too. Ciao. Hanta pulled the phone away from his ear as Kirumi hung up. That was just the talk he needed.